Hey, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and show some love for the series. Every single like and comment truly means a lot and helps keep this project alive. Thanks so much for listening.
Chapter 241 Bellbroke Subjugation, Battle 9, Crackle, Crackle. The feel of the cotton blanket tickling the tip of my nose feels good, so I rub it on my face a few times. If you listen to the crackling sound of the fireplace and bask in the warmth, you will soon fall asleep. Lucy Merrill, a petite figure, peeks out from under the blanket. An old wizard was sitting in front of the fireplace, visible between the soft cotton blankets. He was stabbing the burning firewood with an iron skewer a few times without doing anything else, as if he wanted to watch over Lucy until she fell asleep. Glocked Elderbane is now so old that he can barely stand on his own, and his appearance is so pitiful that you're almost worried that hell collapse if you even touch him. He says he lived long enough to live. They say there's no point in living any longer, but I'm still alive, so I am living. Even when I asked what that meant, Glocked didn't give a clear answer and just prepared Lucy a meal. I lived quite a long time. As the flame flickered, the many shadows that filled the cabin also shook their bodies. A night without stars. A few fireflies were attached to the window as if they were taking over that role, glowing in vain. A handful of wrinkles was seen tightly gripping an iron skewer. Back in the day, I hated my teacher, Glocked, who noticed that Lucy was having trouble falling asleep, perhaps because she had taken too many naps, spoke in a calm voice. Did you know that reciting old stories to a young child who struggles to sleep is best? Glocked Elderbane, who lost his entire family at a young age and lost all meaning and motivation in life. And she went to the great sage and told him that she did not want to live a life of pain like this. She suddenly gave the young Glocked a beating. I couldn't believe that the master of aspect magic, who possessed the world's most advanced knowledge, had started by punching me, but eventually I was completely taken aback by his bright smile and energetic words. Try it first and then tell me, without even knowing. After that, I became the first disciple of Sylvania, who was exiled to Aiken Island and had a pretty eventful day, as I was dragged along as an assistant to my teacher, who was doing everything and doing dangerous things. There were many days when I screamed, got angry, or sighed heavily. He pulled Glock's wrist and showed him the view of the top of the mountain, burst out laughing when he saw him shivering in front of a giant wind wolf he had never seen before, and got angry and asked why he wasn't careful when he got hurt, but treated him and gave him research results. When things don't turn out right, he gets depressed, but the next day he raises his voice and talks about magic theory as if it's never happened before. As I was being manipulated like that, before I knew it, I had become a magician who could make a decent living for one person. As I continued to work hard, people who were disciples and followers of Glocked began to come to me. People praise and read the book that I scribbled on several times to organize the theory. While wandering around the battlefield, I feel sorry for the lives that are dying unfairly, so I use my strength. He also directly defeats monsters and spirits that appear like disasters. I met a woman who was destined for me, loved her like a flame, and had a family. Losing a loved one and losing a family member in a life-threatening battle. I try to pick myself up again by realizing that even in the midst of sadness and devastation, there is still something I want to protect. Arguing with those who slander you and shaking hands with those who support you. Studying, teaching, fighting, running away, crying, laughing, getting angry, making up. If you think about the fact that the place you reach at the end is a cabin deep in this mountain range that no one visits. Glock's words from his childhood, when he predicted that he would end his life in solitude anyway, were correct to some extent. Because you are the person who knows your life best. It may be that he already had insight into his fate at that young age. Nevertheless, if there was something that was not taken into account, it is a process, not a result. I just lived, and people started to climb on my shoulder and lean on me as they pleased. Even though I never asked for it, they came to me and clapped, talked, laughed, cried, worried, got angry. There were more than one or two times that I wanted to throw them away because I thought they were so annoying and annoying. Could it be that I am saying too difficult things to young Lucy? I am worried about that, but I say it slowly, thinking that I'll be happy if Lucy, who's grown up, remembers it someday. I feel empty without it. The image of an old man leaning back against a wooden chair and smiling was engraved in Lucy's pupils. It's not easy to live. Still, Lucy, The day you reach the end of your life, I wish I could remember it like this. Glark quietly looks at the ceiling and falls asleep, as if reminiscing about the times he missed, without ever looking back at Lucy, who was staring at him through a gap in the cotton blanket. It's a good thing I tried living for now. Quara. Was it a flash of light? For a moment, the scene of a cabin in the Raymond Mountains from long ago seemed to come to mind, so Lucy had to quickly grit her teeth and come to her senses. The location was near the plaza at the entrance to the living building. After exchanging elemental magic with great sage Sylvania several times, he was unable to block Velbroke's magic bullet and was stuck in his living quarters. Even though his entire body was covered in several layers of defensive magic, every bone was screaming from the shock. When I put my foot on the floor to get up, it was soggy. The blood that flowed from the body was all over the floor. Without even showing signs of agitation, Lucy raised her magic power and stopped the bleeding. From the looks of it, it looked like it was stuck squarely in the fountain near the entrance plaza. A group of monsters can be seen beyond the wet floor all around. The group of survivors who were fighting the monsters looked in this direction in shock, but Lucy paid no attention and stood up, shaking off the water. Sylvania appears in the sky and draws out magical power again with her huge staff. Lucy spat out the blood that had accumulated in her mouth and raised her magic power, clutching her tattered blouse tightly. You are maintaining that seal surrounding Bellbroke, right? Lucy Merrill. There is barely a trace of reason left in Sylvania's appearance as she looks at her disciple's disciple, son disciple. Although Lucy immediately realized the identity of the other person, she did not show any signs of panic. Instead, he just shook his head. Please don't do anything useless. Please, please, stop doing this. Please, stop it. Stop, stop, stop it. Lucy's head narrowed as her head rang with a cry that sounded like a sharp scream. I was already exhausted from dealing with Velbroke. Moreover, it would be too much to deal with a master of such aspect magic all at once. Still, Lucy Merrill holds her head high. I have no intention of running away or falling down. Even though blood is dripping, he doesn't stop shaking his head. Since I can't directly subdue Velbroke, I am forcing it to maintain the sealing system I built in the past, right? It spits out an unknown sound. Lucy Merrill did nothing. Still, Lucy didn't really try to refute it. It is rare to find someone with the magical power to maintain such a large-scale legal formation. You are the variable that caused all of this, Lucy Merrill, hehe, hehe. Yes, just you, all I need is without you. You. Lucy gently closed her eyes amidst the flowing blood. Ed had already heard the story about Bellbroke's resurrection several times. Lucy said several times that she would carry the burden with her. Even though Lucy was bleeding, she continued her train of thought and succeeded in coming to a conclusion. You've gone crazy, too bad. Lucy looks at Sylvania with blank eyes. No matter how much magic you use, there is a limit to the magic power that humans possess in order to achieve results so enormous that they can surpass the flow of time. It doesn't make sense to jump over such a distant future in one go to reach the present. Lucy always has a blank and bewildered expression, but her insight is still sharp. Lucy, who has a deeper understanding of aspect magic than anyone else, knows it well. There is no way there is such a thing as magic that allows you to jump into the future like time travel. Even if there was one, it would be impossible to handle it with human magical power. So how on earth can Sylvania exist in the now time? Simple. Rather than fast-forwarding the world's time, he stopped his own time. Middle aspect magic time prison. This is a magic that can stop the target's time until the caster's magic power runs out. If you cast it on yourself, it's a truly ignorant and violent method, but theoretically, it's not impossible to send yourself flying into the future. Sylvania's passed when she came to Aiken Island and became obsessed with studying the calculations for magic flow. How much magic power should be poured beyond the time of Bellbroke's resurrection? Sylvania had been calculating that. In addition, calculating horsepower does not end everything. If you cast that massive aspect magic on yourself, even the magical power subordinate to you will be bound in a time prison, so the magic won't work properly, because it's like blocking the caster's magic power. In that case, it is necessary to return the magic power needed to maintain the time prison to an external storage source, a magic that diverts the aspect magic power belonging to one's body to an external magic stone or other storage source. It also has to target an incredibly large amount of magical power. the magic of transformation that Sylvania had been researching on Aiken Island that Merelda had talked about. Now I felt like the puzzle was finally coming together to some extent. Lucy raised her head and looked at the mountain that towered over Aiken Island. The top of the mountain. The altar of replacement that Ed sat guarding during the freshman class placement exam. The identity of the altar, whose origin were unknown, was a trace of Sylvania's research into magic to send herself into the future. You were trying to go over the cliff, like explorers heading towards an unknown continent. He wanted to break through the veil of darkness, launch a sailboat across the open sea, and see it with his own eyes with his teeth clenched. The point where all the futures observed by great sage Sylvania converge into darkness is named Cliff Point. In order to go directly beyond that, great sage Sylvania threw her own body into the future, to see with my own eyes that the future will continue even though I could not observe it. However, what great sage Sylvania had to prepare for was that she had to endure those long years in a time prison. Although the body's time may stop, consciousness blooms, albeit in the dark. Time prison does not affect the flow of the mind. In a scene that seemed to sink into deep darkness, great sage Sylvania endured those long years solely through her own will. But Sylvania is also human. There are limits to human mental power. The fundamental fear of darkness that was already encroaching on Sylvania. Even Crown Prince Lyndon had to be endlessly exposed to the endless fear that stimulated the primal nature of man, which caused him to tremble in the corner of the room during the long years he was trapped in the time prison. The old Sylvania endured and endured. He smiled and said that he would survive all this fear of the end and praised life. I tried to resist the dark whispers that came up whenever I could, time and time again. But my heart broke in the end because, after all, we are human. Even though Lucy didn't know the whole story, she could at least guess the reason why Sylvania was tainted by madness. She had to suffer continuously for a long time, from the primal fear he had been fighting against his whole life. If that's the case, there's nothing you can't understand about Sylvania. The numerous achievements she has made in the past and the efforts she has made to continue to advance the future of the world. Everyone can nod their heads and tell us that they worked hard. But I had no intention of falling down here. This is because Lucy still had something she wanted to protect. What Lucy wants to protect is not something grand or great. The future of the world and the fundamental fear of darkness. These are not things that are so enormous that criminals cannot even fathom them. I'm sorry. Lucy rarely uses polite language. Nevertheless, with her teacher's teacher right in front of her, Lucy bowed her head for a moment. I don't have that much scope, so I can't think about grand things like the world or the future. You know, being a disciple doesn't always turn out the way you want. What Lucy wants to protect is just one man's life. This is the story of a fallen nobleman living in dire straits in the northern forest. Since he gave me a reason to live in my empty life then, I just protect that man's life with all my might. In this process, grandiose reasons such as the fate of the world or the darkness of the origin are not attached. Lucy is not bound by such fate. Since I received something, I just give it back. Since you have received life, it is only right to give back with life. Lucy clenched her fist, blood spattering. I felt like my life could be in danger if I continued like this, but I didn't hesitate. All the stars above Aiken Island have disappeared. This was because the sky was no longer visible because it was covered with thousands of elemental magic circles created by Lucy. Chapter 242 Battle of Bellbroke 10. The two one-eyed giants stood up with their heavy bodies, and their eye level was right at the top floor of the lofty royal residence. With a heavy movement, he swung his hand and smashed one side of the royal residence, causing the outer wall to collapse. The soldiers were shooting arrows at the roof, but there was no sign of them hitting the giant, while the two one-eyed giants were standing tall in the central garden of the royal residence, destroying everything around them. Princess Phenia was running through the corridors of the first floor with Emperor Clole. Her body was already covered in scratches, and the hem of her dress was torn. It was uncomfortable to run, so I took off my shoes and threw them away, and even my white, soft feet were sore and bleeding. Princess Phenia ran away with a frown on her face, and behind her, three giant bats were chasing after her, clinging to the wall of the hallway. Occasionally, soldiers appeared and threw themselves at them to hinder their path, but they were only able to increase the distance slightly and were unable to completely ward off them. And I wonder if there is any meaning to being ostracized in the first place. The garden of the royal residence was already filled with numerous monsters, and wherever you went, the sound of soldiers swinging their swords was filled. There is no escape route. Even my body was injured a lot. While I was hiding in the audience room with Emperor Kloll, I used up almost all of my magic power to escape from the giant bat that attacked me. In the process, he suffered a scar on his forearm and a large cut on his right shoulder, but he was not in a position to sit out because of the pain. Your Majesty, go out the back door. I have a carriage waiting for you. A brave knight stood in front of the giant bat and shouted, "Please escape to a safer place. Our Imperial Guard will stop this at all costs. Even if you go out to the back gate and take a carriage, you don't know where it's going. Aiken Island is already covered with monsters. Still, it's better than staying still." Emperor Kloll nodded and ran faster while holding Princess Fenia's arm. Kara. As I turned down the hallway, I could hear the soldier screaming behind me. After all, it was reckless to stop it alone. He somehow managed to survive by throwing away the loyal young knights as if they were expendable items. Emperor Kloll sighed sadly with a serious expression on his face, and Princess Fenia also closed her eyes tightly. As I exited the back of the main building of the royal residence without even having time to catch my breath, the night air completely filled my lungs. My spirit soared even more in the cold air, but I still felt distant when I saw the amount of monsters covering the sky. Princess Fenia steeled herself again, and this time took the lead and ran towards the back gate. If we continue like this, we might get discovered by the flying monsters. Still, it's 100 times better than sitting still and being attacked. Emperor Kloll, who couldn't muster up courage, took a deep breath and ran. The monsters flying in the sky glance at the two without hesitation. It's as if two people, who at first glance appear to have insufficient fighting skills, are running for their lives. It was the moment when the grotesquely twisted griffin spread its wings, convinced that it had found a good victim. At that moment, the vast sky disappeared. Thousands of elemental magic circles covered the sky, and the flashes of light from them colored the world in an instant. I was lucky. There is no more appropriate expression than that. The moment the magic circles created by Lucy's magic covered the sky, the eyes of all the monsters floating in the sky were focused on the magic circles. A magic circle on a massive scale that has never been seen before, whether by humans or monsters. The sheer number of magic circles left all the audience on Aiken Island stunned, making everyone wonder if even Lucy Merrill could handle it. Eventually, when the magic contained in those numerous magic circles is revealed, the world is colored in a flash of light. Qua- An explosion of a scale that exceeds the limit instantly erases the world. Light, much faster than sound, covers the sky, and the sound of the explosion that follows causes pain in the eardrums. Not only the numerous monsters floating in the sky, but even Bellbroke, who was wrapped in chains, began to struggle in pain. The countless monsters that covered the sky all disappeared for a moment. 6 pieces of rain are pouring down from the sky. The fragmented corpses of monsters cover Aiken Island, and the green forests and grey-white buildings turn red. Patter, 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 patter. It seems as if everything covered in blood symbolizes hell. Fenia felt goosebumps rising all over her body, but she continued to run along the back of the garden. Because of that blow just now, almost all of the monsters that covered the sky disappeared. Of course, considering Velbroke's power to constantly summon monsters, it's only a matter of time before we're covered in numbers again. Still, this moment is the only right time to escape to a safe zone. I managed to find a safe area, avoiding only the monsters that had already landed on the ground. Then, we can at least protect Emperor Kloll's personal safety. With that confidence in mind, I reached the back gate and saw the huge carriage the driver had mentioned standing there. Princess Fenia gritted her teeth and ran out to quickly place Emperor Kloll in the carriage. Then he climbed through the outside door of the carriage, went to the driver's seat, and shouted urgently at the window, "Let's get going right now. Hurry." After saying that and looking inside the coach seat, I held my breath, the body of an old and mature coachman. While waiting for the princess and the emperor at the carriage seat, he was attacked by a gremlin and died. There was a huge knife stuck in his shoulder, and one of the gremlins, eating the corpse, made eye contact with Princess Phinia. Princess Phinia felt as if goosebumps were rising not only from her toes to her head, but also to each and every inner lining of her internal organs. The gremlin with its sword drawn let out a roar and rushed towards Phinia, who was clinging to the carriage. Ah! Phinia quickly pushed her body to the side again, but the arm movement of the gremlin that broke the coach door and jumped out caused her to fall. Phinia, rolling on the mud, saw the gremlin holding its sword backwards and trying to pierce her. I quickly rolled to the side and didn't get stabbed, but my whole body ended up covered in mud. Princess Phinia stood up without hesitation and gathered her magic power. Her specialty is water magic. I took out the cue ball and threw it at the gremlin. The gremlin that was hit directly by the magic took a few steps backwards, screaming in pain. Phinia got up with a trembling body and thrust another ball into the corner of the gremlin's eye. Taking advantage of the gremlin's pain as it clutches its eyes, he casts the mid-level water magic drowning. A puddle of water appears near the gremlin's head, blocking his respiratory tract. The gremlin resisted for a while and tried to release its magic, but Princess Phinia did not lose her concentration even as she was bleeding. After maintaining the magic for a long time, the gremlin eventually lost consciousness and collapsed. Even though I am not a very strong elite monster, I ended up wasting too much time. It even feels like my body's magical power has been used up. Still, Princess Phinia gritted her teeth and got up and got on the carriage seat. When I saw the coachman's corpse with half of his internal organs spilled out along with the blood, I started to lose consciousness again. Even though Princess Phinia was almost completely out of stamina, she managed to move and push the coachman out of the carriage. The coachman's body was spread out on the floor like trash. Princess Phinia felt sorry for not being able to properly show respect to the deceased, so she prayed for a moment and took the whip. Fortunately, the horses seemed to be still safe. It is possible to somehow evacuate out of the royal residence. His entire body was covered in blood and mud, and he looked terrible, but he was alive and well. The moment he thought that, the two horses were trampled by the one-eyed giant's feet and exploded. It happened in an instant. Blood clings to the giant's feet. When I looked up, I saw a one-eyed giant who had come out of the garden and was looking down at Princess Phinia's carriage. It feels like I was trying to get rid of something by stepping on it all at once, but my aim failed, and I ended up killing the horse. The one-eyed giant smiled horribly, saying he was going to step on it and destroy it this time. Those huge feet rise toward the sky again. Die. If you step on it, it explodes and you die. There is no means of resistance. I had to struggle to catch even a low-level gremlin, but there was no way to catch such a high-level monster. The one-eyed giant slowly adjusted the position of his feet and was about to deliver the final blow. Boom! Quong! The blond man who fell onto the carriage was not able to land properly and hit the outside wall and tumbled once. However, he didn't care and just grabbed Princess Phinia's arm and threw himself out of the carriage. The man who rolled on the floor with Princess Phinia in his arms was clearly Ed Rosteller. Ha! At the same time, a lioness made of water came out of the carriage carrying Emperor Kloll. It was 1 second later that the carriage exploded under the giant's foot. Quarang! Dust rises. Phinia, who barely came to her senses after sneezing, saw a man hugging her. And then I hold my breath again. The man was injured so badly that Phinia could not even be compared to him. The amount of bleeding is unusual. At least a lot of the bleeding has stopped, and the wounds all over his body are a mess, as if he had been pierced by an awl or something. It may have been painful even if she was just breathing, but she saved Phinia. Ed Ross Taylor, you. Before he could continue speaking, the one-eyed giant's eyes turned to the two people. Phinia came to her senses again at that moment. Now was not the time to remain still. If we continue like this, we will just end up being crushed by the giant's feet. But the giant never lifted his foot again. Wow! The fire lizard that has brought out its huge body is actually slightly larger than the one-eyed giant. It's like watching a fight between monsters. But Tarkin's fire magic is a fatal blow to the one-eyed giant who has no magic resistance. Flames poured out of Tarkin's mouth and covered the one-eyed giant. Riding on top of the head were Yenica Palova and Princess Phinia's older sister, Selaha. This Princess Phinia. Ed endured the intense pain, stood up, and made eye contact with Princess Phinia right in front of his nose. I'm so glad you're alive, seeing him covered in blood and protecting Phinia's safety. until the end Fenia is greatly embarrassed. He ran all the way to the royal residence where this hell island was spread out, determined to protect Fenia no matter what happened. The blood flowing from Ed's body dripped down Fenia's cheek. Fenia was startled and looked at Ed quietly with shaking pupils, and then she spoke first. "Treatment, don't you need to get treatment? When I am doing this right now." Wah! Tarkin, who had subdued the one-eyed giant, lowered his head, and Princess Yenica and Selaha jumped from above him. The two people who landed on the grass quickly ran over and supported Emperor Kloll with Sela and Ed Rathdeller, with Yenica supporting him. "Obama, are you okay? You are safe, my daughter Selaha. I was worried about you. Thank God. What a relief. I also see that Obama is safe." Selaha couldn't finish his sentence because he was so relieved. Ed, who had put Fenia down in his arms, managed to get up with Yenica's support. "Ed, I'm not feeling well. What should I do if he suddenly jumps like that?" "Really, Ed, if you bleed this much, it wouldn't be surprising if you died right away." When Yenica shouted in a worried voice, Ed raised his head again and spoke. "There is no time for a long explanation. Princess Fenia, you need to go to where Taylor is right now. I beg your pardon, we have to catch that dragon here and now. Otherwise, it will become a disaster that spreads throughout the Empire." After hearing those words, Emperor Kloll, who managed to stand up with Selaha's support, spoke. "You are Sir Ed Rossdale, Your Majesty. It is an urgent situation, so I would like to slowly organize the situation and convey it to you, but we do not have time for that." Ed spoke while suppressing the rising pain. "First of all, you should head to a place where Taylor might be Arfle's Hall, which was a garrison close to the Trix Hall, where Taylor's group was gathered. Arfle's Hall, it's better there than here. It will be safe." And our Ed frowned as he bled once more. Jenica, who was supporting Ed, narrowed her eyes at the sight and spoke to Princess Fenia. "Medical staff. There are no medical staff. Ed needs to get treatment first." "It looks like that, but right now, the monsters have invaded the center of the royal family's quarters. In fact, it's safe to say that there are no medical staff left. I think they're almost all dead. We came all the way here, but you're saying Ed can't get treatment." Princess Fenia looked at Ed's wounds with trembling eyes. "But yes, I can find a way to do it, even if it's just simple first aid, that's it. You can go to the Arfle's Center to receive treatment." In any case, Ed Rosteller's purpose in coming here was not to receive treatment. Even though I was losing my mind right now, the reason Ed came here was clear. If we can confirm that Princess Fenia is safe, then that's fine. Fenia still looked at Ed with a puzzled expression. It was a long relationship, and most of it was a relationship that led to a contract, but she never thought that Ed would do his best for her like this. To think that he would run to the royal quarters in such a state with the sole intention of saving Fenia. Just watching, it was an incredible amount of willpower. Ed Ross Taylor Ed gritted his teeth and turned his gaze back to Emperor Kloll. Anyway, the goal now is to catch Bellbroke. In order to do that, he had to take Princess Fenia with him. In a situation like this, if you were to say that you would include Fenia in the Bellbroke punitive force, there is no way that Emperor Kloll would agree. Still, I had to explain the situation as best as I could and take Fenia with me. "Your Majesty, the Emperor." Ed lowered his head, not paying attention to the blood running down his face. "As you may already be fully aware, what is happening now is in fact a national disaster. If we don't solve it here and now, the casualties will far exceed tens of thousands. Perhaps it wouldn't be surprising if the Empire's legacy ended here. That's right. I don't know whether you will believe it or not. Still, let me tell you, there is a way to defeat Velbroke. But of course it's not easy. But I will try my best." Ed, who refused to let Yenica help him for a moment, walked on under his own power and bowed his head in front of Emperor Kloll. "Princess Fenia is needed. Please allow me to take Princess Fenia." Fenia, who was lying on the floor, suddenly blushed and her shoulders trembled. Princess Elaha, who was supporting Emperor Kloll, watched quietly and suddenly raised her voice. "Ed Rossdeller, don't you feel a bit strange when you ask me something like that?" At Selaha's words, there was silence. No one would think that's what he meant, so you might think he was making a fuss, but Selaha was speaking more sincerely than you might think. That's because Fenia's expression was unusual from earlier. Yenica also seemed to have a strange sense of wildness. She was looking around with an anxious expression. However, Emperor Kloll is a man of insight. The more urgent the situation, the more urgent he always gets to the point. Recklessness should not be mistaken for courage. "Ed Rosteller, That Xiangqinggriang is a mythical monster that even the first swordsman Luden had to risk his life for. But you can't be put to death without even resisting. If we can't finish it here, the damage will spread throughout the continent. First of all, I plan to unite the various garrison forces within Aiken Island and resist. Are you going to summon all those who are torn and scattered all over the island, unable to stand on their own and unable to move, into one place? Fortunately, I can persuade the leaders of each garrison. Combat Club student Chief Dyke Elfalan, Lortel Kehelm, acting president of the Sylvania branch of the Elt Merchant Association. Sylvania Academy student body, President Tanya Rosteller. St. Clarice of the Holy Emperor Telos Church. Belmire, the head maid of the top-class dormitory, Arfeles building. They are all leaders with different values, different lifestyles, and different courses of action in emergency situations. However, if there is one common denominator among all these different people, it is that at the center of the tangled human relationships is a man named Ed Rothdeller. The spirits holding Yenika's letter were already flying and scattering here and there on Aiken Island. Originally, it would have been difficult to send a spirit because of the monsters lined up, but with Lucy's magic, temporarily eliminating the demons in the sky, conditions were created to send a message much more quickly. Lucy's elemental magic was almost a struggle, but as a result, it made it possible for the communication network to be connected between each station more quickly. I sent a message asking you to take responsibility and gather at Arfeles Hall. You all know that if you just hold out in the current situation anyway, you will only face catastrophe. Lortel was protecting the store building by using ice magic to kill monsters among the dying merchants. Suddenly, Caris, a low-ranking wind spirit in the shape of a sparrow, flies in and sits on his shoulder. While the mercenaries of the commercial association are screaming and fighting, outsiders requesting protection are constantly pouring into the commercial building. In the midst of such confusion, Lortel discovers a letter tied to the foot of the spirit sitting on his shoulder and quickly takes it out and reads it. Even though it is a dire crisis, I somehow manage to smile and look up at the sky covered in magic circles. I decided it was a gamble worth taking. The same goes for Dyke Elfalan, who is rescuing survivors at the Combat Unit's Training Center. After receiving Ed's letter, he places his chin in thought and eventually shouts out to the students of the Combat Club stationed there. The road to Arfeles Hall has already been cleared to some extent by the blood-crazed Clevius. Running along that path is low risk. It was a decision worth making. Tanya Rosteller, who headed to the living area, also nodded after receiving the letter. Since Ziggs has already left for Arfeles Hall, it wouldn't be a bad idea to follow him. In particular, if it is a garrison centered around Ed Rosteller, it will be safer because many of the core forces within the academy will be gathered there. Although the distance is a bit further, there is a greater chance of safety being guaranteed at Arfeles Hall. It might be right to break the travel route even now. First of all, it is easiest to follow Ed Ross Taylor's path. The same goes for St. Clarice, who was protesting with priests at the Bachelor's Cathedral. Because she had heard some rumors about Belbroke's resurrection, she was able to deal with it more calmly than expected. It was a quicker resurrection than expected, but I was still mentally prepared. Clarice had been waiting for Ed to contact her from the beginning. This is because the man who predicted Belbroke's resurrection would try to contact him in some way and discuss a course of action. From the beginning, Clarice didn't even suspect the plan to gather at Arfeles Hall and go to subdue Belbroke. All he did was quickly run towards the barricade in the square in front of the cathedral to give instructions to the priests. I can assure you, everyone will gather at Arfeles Hall. Ha he he, Emperor Clow laughed as if he was dumbfounded. Even the emperor of a country has personnel that are difficult to control at once. In particular, bigwigs such as St. Clarice and Lord Lortel were more likely to make conservative decisions in such urgent situations. Is it possible to capture such characters at once and gather them into the Arfeles Hall? Those who lead a group must always calculate risks. I know better than anyone how difficult it is to forcefully move the station and gather in one place while fighting through monster tribes. I know better than anyone else how politically arduous it is to make all the different leaders move with one mind. Nevertheless, this man is confident that he can unite the scattered forces into one place. There are two types of people who can do something like that, or the embodiment of politics, or a hero. Which one is this guy? Emperor Kloll looked at Ed, who was bleeding for a moment, but did not come to a conclusion. It doesn't matter either way. Right now, it's important to address the situation at hand. Whether it's a politician who is good at politics or a hero who can control people, the key point is that the leaders of the station follow Ed's wishes. In that case, wouldn't it be the right decision for the Emperor to trust this man's policy? Emperor Kloll quietly looked at Ed Ross-Taylor. Is this a new flame that has bloomed in the Ross-Taylor family that Crepin was holding and shaking? One way or another, it was not a family rotten to the roots. Chapter 243 Battle of Bellbroke. 11. All the swept-away monsters were scattered in 6 pieces, and the high sky came into view once again. Lucy looked at the sky with blurry eyes. Although he was on the verge of losing consciousness, he knew that Velbrock had landed a significant hit. Throughout history, there are not many people who know how to use the highest-level elemental magic, and even those highest-level magics were often siege magics that were barely cast after several days and nights of preparation. Casting such large-scale magic on one's own is truly an act of eccentricity that seems to deny the very science of magic. Nevertheless, Bellbroke does not fall. Velbroke's scales, which have a certain level of resistance to all types of magic, almost neutralize even the highest level magic that goes beyond common sense. Bellbroke also roared in pain, as it was a large-scale elemental spell that Lucy unleashed with all her might. But all I felt was pain. The group of monsters that covered the sky disappeared for a moment, but soon new monsters were covered by the summoning circle summoned by Bellbroke again. Even though it was a blow that took all her might, Lucy's efforts quickly become meaningless, and the great sage Sylvania stands upright on the broken spire in the living quarters plaza. She appeared with a single swing of her huge staff and lifted the high-level magic space curtain. The aspect magic that twists and bends space and hides in the gap actually transcends all laws of physics and allows you to temporarily block any attacks. The downside is that the casting time is very long and the range is narrow. And since you are also trapped between the curtains of space, it is difficult to judge the external situation easily. In short, since you are crouching quietly in one place with your eyes closed, it is easy to be surprised when you have just released the spell. Nevertheless, the absolute defensive ability to be safe from any attack is an advantage that can offset all disadvantages. It is natural for anyone to be swept away by Lucy's magic, and they survived without even a scratch. That alone made discussing its power more meaningless, and he looks down at Lucy from the top of the broken spire. Lucy's pure white blouse has already lost its original color and is turning red. Only the ends of the sleeves and the inner hem of the skirt still have traces of the original color. The hem of the skirt is torn, and the white knee socks are so worn that they do not maintain their original shape. And as always, hostility is finally beginning to appear in those blank eyes. There is something similar to Will in the way he looks up at Sylvania with his eyes strained. Lucy looked up at Sylvania and spoke, as if wondering what had happened to her, curled up and sleeping in the corner of the bachelor pad. Horsepower conversion speed. Lucy, who is gifted with a natural sense, finally catches Sylvania's loophole. Sylvania Robster is a pioneer of aspect magic and a rare genius who has achieved magical achievements that no one can match. The same goes for the field of combat magic. Innate magical power, fast calculation speed, and appropriate determination. In the field of dueling magic, it is already difficult for Lucy, who is already exhausted, to handle it, as she has abilities comparable to those of great men. However, general magic power and aspect magic power are completely different in nature. If you want to draw down magic power to deal with general elemental magic, you have to scatter away all that magic power and draw out new aspect magic power. This is truly the height of inefficiency. Therefore, it is difficult to use aspect magic and general magic in parallel. Although it may not seem like there is much difference in speed to the average wizard, in battles between the best wizards in the world, the slight gap in the transition is visible. It was a small gap that could only be seen after exchanging hundreds of sums, but Lucy Merrill noticed it in just 3 or 4 sums. Sylvania Robster's aspect magic is a means close to a cheat that ignores all compatibility and irrationally suppresses enemies, but it is not without its flaws. If you tie them down with elemental magic that is difficult to respond to, force them to defend, and then take advantage of the opportunity to cast aspect magic to land a surprise attack, you might have a chance at victory. The reason Ed was able to plunge a dagger into that shoulder was because he used death as collateral to create a gap in the magic conversion. If we fight strength against strength, we really have no chance of winning. What remains is technique and sense. And Lucy Merrill, who was blessed by the stars, has skills and senses that are far beyond those of ordinary people. Quickly devise a strategy to subdue Sylvania and then increase your body's magical power. However, there is almost no magical power left in the body. After exchanging a few words with Sylvania, he is exhausted from the magical power he poured into temporarily neutralizing Bellbroke. My head starts pounding when I try to cast even a mid-level spell, let alone a high-level spell. In a perfect state, Lucy was able to embody dozens or hundreds of high-ranking magic circles like a meal. I frown at myself as I realize how cornered I am. The shadow of death creeps up the back of Lucy's neck. End point of life. If you want to survive and run away, now is the last time. If you want to go further and face the enemy, you must risk your life. Life crisis. A word that is very far from a strong person like Lucy Merrill. However, the blond fallen nobleman was carrying weights as if he were eating a meal. The shadow of a man who gritted his teeth and lived through a crisis that could have cost him his life at any time is placed on Lucy's back. There is nothing you cannot escape from. I am not the type of person who cares about things like pride or honor. However, it occurred to me that running away from here would be disrespectful to that man. Lucy Merrill didn't even worry about it. He clenches his teeth and gathers up his depleted magic power again and again to continue the fight, relying on his skills and senses. 6 or 7 basic wind magic wind blades fly towards Sylvania. Sylvania snorts and swings her staff to neutralize them all. Only when the firepower is comparable to that of high-level magic can it be meaningful to use evasive maneuvers. Basic magic will never reach Sylvania's body. However, Lucy didn't care and just waved her arms and performed the basic fire magic ignition. The fireworks blooming around Lucy block the view. Then he manifested the basic earth magic earth wall and hid himself between the rising walls. At this point, Sylvania noticed. Lucy really has no magical power left anymore. Even mid-level magic that can be used casually must be used sparingly. The proof is the basic magic that has been rampant since a while ago. That Lucy Merrill uses basic magic. It's like a small crossbow arrow coming out of a huge ballista. Lucy thought as she ran across the earthen wall. You can't win. He will probably die here. In that case, you should at least take Sylvania with you. Ed Rothtaler said there was a way to prevent Bellbroke, that massive disaster. However, I have never heard anything about Sylvania Robster. The resurrection of great sage Sylvania was something that was completely beyond Ed Rothtaler's calculations. A magic duel is basically a battle of firepower. But if you go into details, there is a lot more area of calculation. And the basic premise of calculation in a duel is to put one's own safety first. It means that if you rush in with the determination to throw your life away, you will go beyond the realm of rational calculation. In other words, you can catch your opponent off guard. Just once. If you can risk your own life to create an opening where you can strike Sylvania with a single blow if you can do so, and kill her with a single strike at a vital point, you can at least eliminate the beginning of disaster. The stake is Lucy's own life. In the end, Bellbroke will have to be defeated by someone else, but Lucy has no doubt about Ed's words. Bellbroke will be resolved somehow. If so, your role is clear. Ah, black, big, big black. Silenia lands toward the square with an unknown face, Since Lucy Merrill realized that she didn't have much strength left to resist any longer, there was no reason to hold back any longer. The earthen walls are tangled like a maze. These are earthen walls implemented to make the opponent wander even a little, but such tactics do not work on the strong. Boom! An earthen wall created with basic magic can be completely shattered just by pouring in magical power. Lucy's maze, made up of several layers of fire and earthen walls, is instantly neutralized, and Lucy, bleeding and limping away, is seen at a glance. Sylvania raised her arm and unleashed the elemental magic of ice to deliver the final blow. Lucy already has little strength to resist. That was the moment when the ice spear was struck into Lucy's body. Lucy's body shattered and disappeared. When a person is stabbed by an ice spear, he or she is a creature that splatters blood and spills out internal organs. It does not disappear into pieces like machine parts. It was an illusion from the beginning. A wise Sylvanian would not fall into such a one-dimensional trap. A girl who has been consumed by madness and has almost lost her sense of reason. Since Sylvania was only focused on destroying the enemy in front of her, she failed to take into account the fact that Lucy was also good at quick wits and improvisation. Blocking the view with earthen walls and ignitions was simply to buy time to set up new traps in the gap. It embodies the basic freezing magic ice knife and makes it rise from the ground. An illusionary imprint is engraved on the shiny surface using magic. Lucy does not have the magical power to use proper high-level illusion magic. Using catching techniques and making bait is all that can be done right now. Rather, because high-level illusion magic leaves a strong magical aftereffect, there is a possibility that it could be easily seen by high-level magicians like Sylvania. Therefore, he tries to deceive the enemy by somehow drawing out what little magical power he has left. No matter what anyone says, this is the fighting style of the weak. Fooling and running away, throwing sand in your eyes, picking up rocks and chopping them, tearing off your hair, digging in your nails, biting your thighs. People like Lucy have experienced this type of fighting throughout their lives, trying to fill the gap in power with tricks and tricks. It cannot be seen. Lucy Merrill lived her whole life as a strong person, because pressing down with the amount of force is the fight she has been fighting all her life. Therefore, this type of fighting method is not something Lucy learned on her own. Kwong, Lucy, bleeding profusely and hiding with camouflage magic, stands up behind Sylvania. Sylvania was startled and scattered magic behind her, but that too was just an illusion of Lucy imprinted on the ice knife. Lucy was floating above Sylvania's head, hiding herself in the rising smoke. Covered in blood, it looked like a corpse, but it was definitely alive. Lucy's hand, which came out through the smoke, had already gathered all the magical power that had been scraped up to the floor, on the tree of the hut camp, on the roof of the hut, on the altar of change at the top of the mountain, in the Ross Taylor mansion, in the combat club's sparring hall, the fight of the man who was sitting blankly looking down. Before you know it, it is engraved in Lucy Merrill's eyes, those bright eyes that seemed to be filled with starlight. It was not an honorable fight as a wizard, something Lucy had learned from Glocked when she was young. It's not like a duel that the wizards of the Magic Tower engage in with courtesy. Lucy Merrill lived her whole life as a strong woman. Ed Rosteller lived his entire life as an underdog. Since they are two people who have faced each other as if their backs to each other, their way of life and way of fighting are bound to be completely opposite. They shouldn't have been able to understand each other's positions. That's why Lucy had to be defeated so miserably by Sylvania. Lucy, completely exhausted in front of the great sage Sylvania, is truly in the position of the weak. The picture of Lucy, who cannot understand the position of the weak, being crushed and defeated due to the difference in power, was quite predictable. But you don't know what's going on in the world. Perhaps the beauty of life is that we don't know what the future will be because it is full of unknown variables. The back of Glocked, sitting in an armchair and warming up by a bonfire. My decision that day was to fall asleep in a wooden shelter I found by chance while walking through the northern forest to see if there was a good place to take a nap. Then, a connection took place and turned around to create the Lucy Merrill she is today. Lucy Merrill felt a sense of irony and was drawn to the series of strange and inexplicable coincidences. Wow! Frowning, Sylvania turned her head back to Lucy. As she tried to swing the huge staff, Lucy noticed that the young magic power in her hands was dark red. It is the magic power of the aspect. Here the numbers are twisted once more. The fact that he was able to bring out aspect magic power, which consumes much more mental power than normal magic power, means that this is the end of the story. This is because using aspect magic, when already pushed to the limit, is close to an act of suicide. I never thought that at this time I would push myself further to my limits and use aspect magic. Is the magic that appears a time prison. Lucy, who had to suppress Sylvania in one blow, would have had to implement suppression magic anyway. No matter what, once you are attacked, you will definitely be overcome. However, that is when targeting an opponent who cannot use aspect magic. It is ridiculous to discuss aspect magic in front of Sylvania, the master of aspect magic, disperses the raised magic power and instantly raises the magic power of the star level. Aspect magic can only be countered by aspect magic. If you quickly dissipate Lucy's aspect magic, all that will remain is death for Lucy, who no longer has the energy to fight. It was a moment to deal with it by raising the magic power of the aspect. H-wah. Lucy Merrill's young hands as she lands towards Sylvania, that red aura disappears. Eventually, the red energy completely disappeared due to the elemental magic brought out by Lucy. What? Sylvania couldn't believe her eyes. If you want to convert from aspect magic power to general magic power, an inefficient process arises where you have to first disturb the accumulated magic power. For a wizard who has reached the peak like Lucy or Sylvania, the time difference is less than 1 second. That brief gap of 0.5 seconds or not is not a significant flaw against most wizards. However, in this urgent situation of battle of numbers, it is a completely different story. Forcefully close the distance and draw him out in a battle of wits. No matter what anyone says, Lucy's strategy of finding the opponent's flaws and digging into them was very similar to Ed Ross Taylor's fighting style. But how does Lucy achieve such a rapid conversion of magical power? Even Sylvania, a master of aspect magic, ends up with a very small gap, but Lucy's ability to convert magical power without even allowing for that moment makes no sense theoretically. However, when Sylvania saw Lucy's arm that was soon revealed, she stuck her tongue out. In the first place, he did not even manifest his magic power. What Lucy manifested was general magical power. Since there was no process of converting magic power, it was much more than the amount of magic power produced by Sylvania. What looked like dark red magic power was not magic power. Affected by the burning flame of ignition magic, Lucy's magic also only appeared dark red. Lucy set her arm on fire, just for a simple trick. It was only for a moment, but a smudged burn came into view. It is clear that it is a scar that will probably not disappear even if it lasts a lifetime. The pain that rushes in will not be normal. A clear decision. The two fakes using illusions were a trap set in the first place to make the situation more urgent and lead Sylvania to take hasty action. 3 ice spears gathered around Lucy, using only the magical power accumulated in this short period of time. The strategy may have been taken from Ed Rosteller's method, but it was possible because Lucy had basic magic sensitivity and was able to pull off even this middle-level magic in a short period of time, such as a few seconds. There wasn't much time allowed for Sylvania. Because of Lucy's fake, the magic power of the aspect was drawn, so there was less than a second to gather the magic power. There is a limit to the magic power that Sylvania gathered in that split second. Still, if you use Lucy's ice spear to defend yourself, you can avoid fatal injuries. Although it is not possible to manifest high-level magic, it is possible to exert a certain amount of physical power simply by discharging the accumulated star magic. Quarara. This entire flow of thought came to an end in less than a second. Lucy's ice spear hit the square, causing a huge cloud of dust to rise. Whoop Lucy, who was cornered, used all the means at her disposal to make her final move. The final blow, which he attempted by burning one of his arms, unfortunately missed. Haha, Sylvania was frowning and panting. The ice spear that landed in front of his nose had its trajectory forcibly distorted by the influence of the magic power of the aspect and fell into the bare ground. However, even if the orbits had been slightly less divergent, the ice spear would have split his head open. Lucy's strategy didn't work in the end. One last variable that Lucy failed to take into account. It was luck. In order to widen the attack range as much as possible, he used all his magical power to create 3 ice spears. But in the end, the space twisted by the star magic succeeded in bending the trajectory of the ice spears. Lucy was spread out on the floor, covered in blood. Sylvania frowned and looked at Lucy. In terms of absolute amount of magical power, operational ability, and size of power itself, Sylvania may surpass Lucy. However, the quickness and improvisation that configures the environment to achieve victory, even in the most extreme situations. A fighting style that attempts to win by force, even if there is only a 0.1 chance. That's not something you can learn from a wizard. Sylvania shook her head and pointed her magic wand at Lucy, who was lying down. This is someone who should never be left alive. The moment that thought filled her head, Lucy's eyes, stained red with blood, flashed. Lucy suddenly opens her eyes and glares at Sylvania. He grits his teeth and tries to draw out his magic again. Now, only magical power flowed out that was so weak that it was embarrassing to even call it magical power. But Lucy used that magical power as support to raise herself up again. Lucy, with her tattered school uniform hanging down, raised her head with difficulty and glared at Sylvania. The fighting spirit is still evident in the sound of breathing. Lucy thinks, even if death approaches, I have no intention of running away. Even as the fear of death crawled through his body, the man always stood upright. The same goes for you. Since he has received a life, he gives his life for that man. In some ways, this can be seen as a natural thing, isn't it? Even for 10 seconds. No, even for 1 second longer if I could tie Sylvania's feet, that would make the man's chances of survival even zero. One more cert. Life is thrown away as a stake without any hesitation. That decision has never changed. Even as she watched Sylvania manifest her magic, Lucy stood up straight without wavering. I am wondering if there's any way to resist further, but I guess that's it. The brightening light of magical power makes my vision become distant. Lucy closed her eyes gently. I can feel the warm light of a bonfire. I now understand the sight of Glarkt peeking out from under the cotton blanket. At the end of my life, when I thought it was just a meaningless life, I was glad I was still alive. If you can monologue how meaningful it is in itself, I felt like I finally understood what those words meant. I met a man and died for him. If you could recall that it was a meaningful life, how valuable would it be? That's why a gentle smile could come out of Lucy's mouth. Just like that, my vision became distant. Quara. However, when you open your eyes, the sight you see is not the afterlife. The reality is that there are people who still bleed and somehow grit their teeth to survive. Listen carefully, Lucy. By the time he realized that he was being held in the arms of a man who was covered in blood, just like himself among the ruins of the broken spire, he was already losing consciousness. However, Lucy knows well the scent of the man holding her. Amidst the bloody smell, the scent of grass that had so reassured Lucy rose. No matter what happens, never accept death. The magic that Sylvania used was temporarily neutralized by Yenica Palova's spirit magic. It was a magic that was used urgently, but just receiving it made Yenica have to grit her teeth. When Lucy opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Ed running towards her, rolling on the floor and grabbing Lucy, and then the group that was blocking Sylvania. They were Ed's companions who had escaped from the royal residence. You held up really well. Lucy, you held up really well, thank you. But Ed, who was hugging Lucy, who was covered in blood, was also already covered in blood. It was difficult to see both of them alive, but somehow they gritted their teeth and survived. Resist death at all costs, death. Never accept it. Lucy looked up at Ed with wide eyes. Ed endured the excruciating pain throughout his body and lifted himself up while hugging Lucy. We flee to Arfeli's pavilion. Reinforcements will be gathered there. Ed gritted his teeth as he pulled Lucy, who was sagging limply from lack of strength, as he said that. Lucy looked up at Ed and instantly burst into tears. Was it because he was relieved to see that Ed was alive? Or was he somehow relieved that he was alive? Perhaps it was both. Lucy shed tears even as she held on to her fading spirit. Although her face was covered in blood and tears, she looked terrible, but Ed still wiped away Lucy's tears. Chapter 244 Battle of Belbroke 12 All-Out War. A situation in which you must achieve victory by using all the means at your disposal. My continued efforts over the years have been solely to overcome this ordeal. In a scene where the monsters were sweeping Aiken Island and the world seemed to be falling apart, I held Lucy tightly. Lucy let out a groan of pain, perhaps because her entire body was covered in wounds, but my whole body ached as well. I am in a position where I am forcing myself to move my body, which has reached its limits. Still, it was necessary to pull Lucy out and bring her to safety. I am going to run. After saying this to Lucy in my arms, I ran into the alley between the buildings in the residential building. Sylvania's primary target is Lucy Merrill. This is because they thought that only by getting rid of Lucy, who was blocking Velbroke alone, would Xiang Changrayang, who was chained up, be able to run wild more freely. So the first priority was to get Lucy, who was unable to fight, out of the battlefield. Princess Phinia and Yenica alone would not be able to fight Sylvania. However, running away is possible. Lucy Merrill would also have been able to escape if she tried her best. It's just that I didn't do that. This is because he decided that he should tie the feet of the holy spear dragon, Belbroke, and the great sage, Sylvania. The plan is to gather at Arfley's Hall like this and deal with that crazy wizard by ourselves. Taylor is going to go fix Bellbroke. I picked up Lucy, tied her wound tightly, and ran as hard as I could. Blood from Lucy's and my bodies lined the alley. It's all right, what? As I walked forward with all my might, I questioned Lucy's unexpected words. Because you're alive. Lucy doesn't talk long. To begin with, she is a girl who has little ability to express her emotions. However, maybe it was because I came here after seeing the magic light. Perhaps because he was overflowing with emotion, he spoke while struggling to lift his bleeding body. I wondered what if you were dead. You know that. After hearing Lucy say she was worried, I decided to reassure her. No matter what happens, surviving in the end is my specialty. Lucy took a deep breath when she heard those words. In fact, Lucy didn't know either. One way or another, I will be alive. Because he was so confident, he probably tried to hold Sylvania's feet a little longer. Woo wow wow wow. At that moment, Lucy sneezed and spit out blood. I frowned and placed Lucy down, leaning against the outside wall of the building. Lucy suffers from intense pain. I pushed down the hair that was stuck to my cheek along with the blood and checked my condition again. The situation was so urgent that I realized it too late, but one of my hands was completely burned. In addition, there were stab wounds all over the body, and many scars from magical bullets were visible. The wounds that can be seen through the gaps in the tattered school uniform are just that. But if you take a closer look, it's hard to even imagine how devastated they must be. In addition, he has been suffering from high fever, body aches, and hemoptysis since before. Sometimes, he nods his head or gestures in the air as if hallucinating. I know what this is like. I experienced it when I was overworked and fell ill. I remember repeatedly drawing more magical energy from my body than necessary, causing the flow of magical energy flowing through my body to become distorted. This is a phenomenon that occurs when completely exhausted magical power is recovered from the body and cannot return to its original flow. At that time, I lay in bed for several days, but in the end, Lucy used her magic to cut the tangled magic in my body and throw it away. It was a fairly rough solution, but I remember it being quite effective. Ha 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 ha, I pulled out what little magical energy was left in my body while leaning Lucy against the wall, who was making a sound of pain as she stopped breathing. As I placed my finger around Lucy's solar plexus, closed my eyes, and concentrated, I felt Lucy's magic. As the completely depleted magical power was recovered again, it was scattered throughout the body and was unable to find its proper path, becoming tangled up here and there. The key cause is that the body's recovery system and the magic power recovery system are not well aligned. In any case, there was a need to untangle the tangled magic power. I gritted my teeth and raised my magic power, just like Lucy had done to me, to release the magic tangled in Lucy's body. Now is not the time to worry about other people's physical condition. I also need to get treatment right now. But if Lucy is left like this, she will definitely die. By drawing on the strength of her body, she managed to return Lucy's magical power to its original flow. Although it is only a weak amount of magic power that has just begun to recover, since it is Lucy's magic power, the amount alone is enormous. I had to use up almost all of my body's energy just to twist and break that slight flow. Haha, I was completely exhausted and barely managed to come to my senses as I raised my eyes. Lucy's breathing was also quite stable. Unlike when I was coughing and spitting out blood, I felt quite stable, and whenever I repeated inhalation and exhalation, my lungs continued to relax and contract stably. For now, the big crisis has barely been overcome. The next thing is that one of Lucy's arms is covered in burns. The red scar appears to have already formed the shape of a flame. Since it is a fresh burn, the pain will be quite severe. Although the pain had not completely subsided yet, it was necessary to cool down the remaining heat. This scar will last a lifetime, but if you deal with it well, it won't cause you to lose the use of your hands. It would be best to summon ice using icebound magic, but that is a power beyond my scope. I first used wind magic to somehow cool down the surface of Lucy's skin, and then placed my hand on her forehead to measure her temperature. Slowly, Lucy's breathing becomes more stable. The situation is slowly stabilizing. Quang, quara. The sound of Sylvania's elemental magic was heard from the entrance plaza. I told Jenica to hold on as long as she could and then run away, but even that didn't seem to be easy. Sylvania has already allowed Yenica to escape once. You won't want to allow it 2 or 3 times. Still, if Yenica decides to run away, it will be really difficult to catch her. Suppressing all those countless spirits is a separate area from the size of the power. It is bound to be very time-consuming. Once Lucy's physical condition had stabilized, it was time to start again. Widely. Lucy slowly opened her eyes and lifted her healthy hand to hold my hand that was taking her temperature. Then he pulls his hand down and places it on his cheek. It was as if he wanted to feel the warmth of his palm. And then, in a dazed voice, he spoke softly, "It's not a dream. I was worried that the fact that you were alive was a dream and that what I was seeing was a flash of light. I said you don't have to worry. I am alive and well." "Ha! Thank you for being alive." He said something so strange that I tried to ask him what it meant, but the answer came out before I could even ask the question. "I was going to die. Why do you do such a useless thing? I don't think I can stop it unless I risk my life. So I tried to die without any worries." Lucy Merrill initially aimed for Dangwajin. Even if I did that, I didn't know whether I would be able to subdue Sylvania or not, but I wanted to do my best as much as I could. "You gave meaning to my meaningless and vain life. So, wouldn't it have been a meaningful life even if I died for you? Wouldn't it be possible to say that I lived a good life?" I had that thought, so, surprisingly, I wasn't that scared of dying. Lucy speaks while tracing my palm with her cheek. Although his face was stained with blood and wounds, his gently closed eyes looked comfortable. It was an amazing feeling. "If you say something absurd like that again, I will give you a serious look. Listen carefully." I took my hand off Lucy's cheek and put my hand into her bosom. He then took out a phoenix ring and carefully placed it on Lucy's finger. Lucy, who went down to the ghost library to get the ring, would know very well what kind of ring this is. "Don't think about dying for me. Think about living for me. Live no matter what happens." I just said it too. Death should never be accepted. Life is meaningful if you live for yourself or for something else. So I won't talk too much. I really hope you survive. I will feel great loss and sadness if you die. First of all, it would be most efficient for Lucy to have Professor Glast's phoenix ring. However, right now, Lucy's magic power is twisted, and she is in a state of complete disrepair, so it will be difficult to utilize the power of this ring properly. You need some time to collect yourself. In the meantime, I spoke clearly so as not to have unnecessary thoughts or lose my will. "Live for me." When Lucy heard those words, her pupils dilated unexpectedly. As he accepts the ring, his face turns red. Anyone who sees Lucy Merrill with a face like this would be shocked. He looked at me as if he couldn't believe his ears and couldn't believe the ring on his hand. He glanced up at my face with his pupils dilated to their limit. "It may be difficult to move your body right now, but once your magic power recovers a little, that ring will be of great help. You have it. Maybe it's because my physical condition isn't normal. I don't think I'll be able to escape like this until the end. I'll try another way, so just rest here for now. But this ring is your secret weapon I told you. Do you have to say it one more time?" Lucy looked down at the ring, her face blushing to the limit, and nodded. Eventually, life returned to his dazed eyes, and he answered as if he was chanting. "Okay." Lucy pursed her lips, blocking the flowing blood with her barely recovered magic power. "I will live for you." "Excellent." I patted Lucy's head and somehow managed to get her body, full of intense pain, up. When I finally managed to get up, I could see Lucy's body lying in complete disrepair. Although he is said to be a rare genius wizard that will never be seen again in the history of the continent, when he sits against the wall, he is so small and weak. Looking at its small body and thin limbs, it feels like it will break at any moment. In the end, if you look at it all, everyone is a weak person. If a creature is pushed to its limits and faced with death, it will ultimately have no choice but to struggle with all its might. That's people. I carefully got up and turned towards the entrance plaza where Sylvania and Yenica were standing face to face. Crazy Sylvania. In the end, it is an enemy that cannot be dealt with one-on-one. All available forces must join in to subdue them. The difficulty of a raid is ultimately determined by the number of players. I wanted to gather all my power if possible, but there are still limits. Quang, quah, quonk. It was that moment. I was trying to escape to Arfale's hole somehow. The sky, which I thought would be covered by monsters again, was now colored with a dark red magic circle. Its nature is completely different from Lucy's magic circle. It was a magic circle of an unfamiliar shape. but surprisingly, it was shaped like something I had seen before. I quietly looked up at the sky and eventually realized the identity of the magic circle. At that moment, I had no choice but to quickly run towards the entrance plaza with my eyebrows narrowed. Ara, ara, help me, Assistant Manager Hoju. That arm. The entrance to the upper chamber is open. Half of the mercenaries were killed. If you stay like this. Lortel Ketchelm crossed the hallway of Elt Company, hearing a sound that he could not tell whether it was a scream or a report. As the sound of footsteps continued, the window was broken by the aftereffects of the gremlin's magical power, and a strange-looking monster climbed through the window. Lortel activated ice magic and gravity magic to quickly kill the monsters that had invaded the building, then entered the office and closed the door. Secretary Rihanna, who came in after him, looked at Lortel's expression, sweating coldly, but Lortel was not shedding a single drop of sweat. Close the windows and draw the curtains, Secretary Rihanna. Nee Nape. The embarrassed Secretary Liana quickly did as she was told and closed the window and drew the curtains. Eventually, no screams of confusion were heard inside Lortel's office. However, every now and then, I felt an explosion sound or a big or small vibration. I could clearly see how chaotic it was outside. Lortel, who had just returned from the battle, placed the letter he had received from the spirit of Yenneker on his desk and slumped down in his chair. I finally had time to catch my breath, so I took a deep breath and exhaled deeply. Assistant President of the Association's Secretary Rihanna called out to Lortel in a trembling voice, but Lortel did not respond. I close my eyes and think over the contents of the letter I received. Please come to Arfle's Hall for assistance. Great Sage Sylvania has been resurrected and is slaughtering the powerful within the Academy. I need help defeating Bellbroke. To summarize, it was like this. Perhaps because it was a letter written in a hurry, it was condensed as concisely as possible. Regardless of the request to gather together and the need for help in subduing Belfrock, I wonder what they are talking about Sylvania. However, looking at the handwriting, it is clear that it was written by Ed Rosteller. So, in situations like this, it is right to first believe and follow it. The Sylvania branch of the Elk Company is full of chaos. Even in hell, where no one can help but tremble in fear, Lortel remains calm and collected. The mental strength to maintain reason in any situation is like her trademark. If you want to apply to the Arfle's Hall, you will have to give up the Chamber's branch building. Not only will the Chamber branch building be devastated, but there is a high possibility that all physical assets, such as inventory stored in the internal warehouse, will be lost. You may wonder what the importance of such assets is when dozens of merchants' lives have already been lost. But the warehouse of a branch of a company, such as Elt Company, is filled with valuables that cannot be purchased even if you pay $1,000. Even if we give up defending the branch, there is no guarantee that we will be able to reach Arfle's Hall without any damage. In many ways, it is a very risky choice. Nevertheless, Lortel makes a plan to head to the Arfle's Pavilion as Ed requested. There is no end to just defending the branch building without any solution. It might be better to think about solving the fundamental threat, Bellbroke. Moreover, if the person who proposed the methodology is Ed Rothtailor, it may be a gamble worth taking more than you think. I close my eyes and think about the blonde man. The sense of discomfort Lortel felt every time he thought of that man was the sense that he was standing on a different stage. Ever since Ed Rothtailor began making a living for himself at Sylvania Academy, Lortel has always stood by his side. He tried to walk next to him and follow his path as much as possible. But the discrepancy he always felt at crucial points remained as a deep sense of discomfort in Lortel's heart. I thought they were walking side by side, but Ed always seemed to be looking in a different direction. There are many days when I feel like there is something like a huge barrier standing between me and him. Lortel Ketchelm is a character from the main character generation in the main scenario. Ed Rothtailor is just an extra who doesn't even get a chance to shine on the stage. The gap may seem small or enormous. Lortel doesn't know the details. However, he is a person with a natural sense of intuition. There are times when something like a fantasy suddenly flashes before his eyes, stimulating Lortel's anxiety. Is it a dream or a hallucination? Taylor McLaura walks. Clutching the sheath of the sword tightly, he walks forward with a strong expression and determination. Next to him, Isla, his companion and lover, walks side by side. After that, the Princess Phenia, who learned a strong will, Ziggs, who became accustomed to the flow of civilization, Clevius, who overcame his cowardice, and Elvira, who realized the depth of humanity, walk out. The protagonist generation, who have gone through and overcome their own hardships, grown and become stronger, walks out with dignity, walking the path of a hero amidst pouring applause. Lortel Ketcheln stands at the very back and walks out as a member of that glorious and wonderful generation of protagonists, and Ed Rothtaler passes by them. The direction we are moving in is the opposite. It is neither majestic nor grand. Instead, he shoves his hands in his pockets, opens his wide, worried eyes, and passes by in the opposite direction to Taylor. There is no such thing as receiving applause or praise, let alone being in the spotlight. After that, Jenica Palover, Lucy Merrill, Clarice, Dyke Elfelen, Selaha Aina Klol, Traciana Bloomriver. The extras who came down from the stage pass behind them. Suddenly, I look back at the group that passed by. In Lortel's eyes, they feel like they are slowly moving away. The stage you are standing on is different. Unfortunately, that is not Lortel's stage. I receive more light, receive more praise, and am on my way to achieving what I want and becoming happy. There is no Ed Rossdaler on that road. Mr. Hoju. At that moment, I came to my senses while Secretary Rienna called. Secretary Rienna does not break Lortel's concentration as he organizes his thoughts. This means that a situation has arisen that needs to be made known. Lortel, who had barely regained consciousness because he was concentrating too much, looked at Rienna with a puzzled expression. When I opened the window again, I saw a huge shadow-like figure outside the window. Eventually, the dark red magic circle covering the sky comes into view. I can't help but realize the identity of that gigantic shadow shape in an instant. That huge shadow figure, I remember seeing it once already. However, when I saw it in the past, it was only a part of it. Even the calm Lortel couldn't help but panic for a moment, as he had never seen it descend in its complete form. Yenica Palover is a girl who was broken by failure. I received everyone's expectations, received a lot of love, and worked hard, but in the end, the ending I awaited was stained with failure. Devoured by frustration and despair, she lived a helpless life until the day she graduated, a girl who was quietly no longer heard from. That was an unchanging fact in all the futures Sylvania observed. The failure that Jenica Palover experienced was something that she could never overcome with her temperament and values alone. However, the shadow of a gigantic shape slowly rising before Sylvania's eyes was completely denying that fact. The dark red law that covers the sky is a huge summoning circle that was created when Yenica was dominated by Velasper. It was impossible to fully implement it with Yenica's capabilities, and even if it were her current skill, she had to be prepared to burn out all the magic circuits in her body. It was an absurd level of Dharma training. Even Yenica, who has reached the pinnacle of elemental magic, is a level of magic that requires her to risk her life. Even if you don't lose your life, it's a gambling move that may rob you of your reason and will. However, the greatness of its power cannot be compared even with spirits of any other attribute. The swirling shadow takes the shape of a devil and gradually becomes larger. Yenica Palover kneels on a magic circle made up of dozens of layers, holding a staff. Sylvania's eyes widen as she looks down at her. I have never read a future like this before. Nevertheless, it is a future that has arrived. What Yenica Failover thought after reaching the extreme limit was that she must protect Aiken Island with all the means at her disposal. Therefore, from Jenica's perspective, she commits the most offensive act. The trauma left deep in my heart from the experience of failure seemed to be tearing away my heart. Yenica Palover looked up at Sylvania with her eyes filled with determination. Half of the light pink hair turns pure white. The dark spirit's unique imprint creeps up my skin. However, will cannot be eaten. You will not be helplessly led by the power of the dark spirit and eaten whole. A burden builds up in my body, and the imprint of darkness constantly tries to penetrate my thoughts, but Yenica ultimately completely subdues and controls the power of the dark spirit, without even borrowing the power of the Phoenix Ring with his own power. I feel as if the flow of magical energy in my entire body is fluctuating and burning. If you try to wield a spirit that exceeds your skills, you have no choice but to cut yourself off. It feels as if you have fallen into a hot fire pit and are burning. Nevertheless, the firm will in Yenica's eyes does not disappear. Darkness falls in the sky. A devil's figure, bigger than the tall spire standing in the square, stands erect as if he were going to eat the whole world. Darkness, the primal fear of humans that Sylvania was wary of and wary of. Yenneker Failover, who controlled it, stands up straight. It is said to be the darkness of the mythical era, the highest-ranking dark spirit. Glaskin's roar spreads throughout the living quarters. The top of MT, altar of change. A huge magic tool that the great sage Sylvania created long ago to replace her own magical power. A man is kneeling in front of the altar. He lowered his head and broke out in a cold sweat while drawing out a huge flow of magical power. Short-cut hair and crumpled wrinkles can be seen under the hem of the robe. Swallowing dry saliva, he continues to pour magical power into the engraving on the altar of replacement. The man's arms were wrapped with magic chains. The surrounding area is full of corpses of monsters. The man's clothes were also completely stained with blood. Without lowering his outstretched hand, the man continued to pour out magical power in his kneeling position. However, it seems that the limit is coming soon. With his vision gradually fading, the man grits his teeth one last time. Even in my fading mind, I regain my composure. The last principal of Sylvania Academy. Obel Forcius was looking up at the sky that was falling into ruin. Chapter 245 Bellbroke Subjugation, Battle 13. A drop of blue paint fell onto the lukewarm water. A drop of paint that falls into the water initially leaves only a small trace. However, little by little, it spreads inside the cup, increasing its power here and there, and eventually dyes the entire water in the cup blue. Just a tiny drop. At first, it was only the beginning, but by the end, the world inside the cup had changed into a completely different scene. No one knows how the water shaking in the cup will shake, or how the paint shaking inside will spread. But the results are all the same. The change that begins with this tiny drop of paint changes the world. The butterfly effect caused by that one small variable eventually turns around and completely changes the distant future. I have been researching ways to create this paint-like entity in this imperial laboratory. Crown Prince Leanfell. These were the words of great sage Sylvania. Prince Leanfell, who had been seriously injured due to Sylvania's research, tried to use the damage as compensation to ask what Sylvania had been researching and what she had observed. And the answer returned from Sylvania was that this world is a closed world that will one day end without warning. Eternal darkness that cannot even be observed. Cliff Point. The promised darkness that has come to an end where all future possibilities extend in various directions and must be faced no matter how one struggles. As he observed that primal fear together, Prince Leanfell had no choice but to swallow dry saliva. No matter how I observed it, the future did not change. How can this world escape from the deep darkness, the cause of which cannot even be measured? I was locked in the laboratory of the Imperial Lily Palace to figure out how to do just that. Prince Leanfell speaks while trembling. Then have you figured out a way? No. At those words, Prince Leanfell swallowed his dry saliva. I just came up with several possible hypotheses. The conclusion I came to is that the world we live in now is a closed world. It's a world where no matter how you proceed, you have no choice but to face the same ending. I can't believe it even after hearing it with my own two ears. It has to be that way. But if this hypothesis is correct, I have the means to struggle somehow. If we can't escape the cliff just based on the possibilities within this world, we have no choice but to bring in beings from outside the world who can create new variables. He is a person from a world that has nothing to do with the flow of this world. Sylvania closes her eyes. The existence of another world beyond the distant world of stars, which I observed through the constellation magic that I have studied throughout my life, I definitely feel it. I don't know how it will work or how it will work. And since no one has tried it, we cannot make hasty conclusions about how it will be implemented, because it is about attracting beings who are not subject to this world. Then, if there's anything I can do to help, I'll help as much as I can. Thank you, Prince, but there's not much I can be sure about. Aspect magic is a discipline that still leaves many unknown areas. Sylvania is the world's greatest authority on aspect magic, but there are still too many things she has not tried. It requires a huge amount of magic power and preparation time, and there are still a lot of magic formulas left to research. And even if I tried, I don't know if I would be able to summon it to the time we are in now. Is it possible to summon oneself directly, or is it possible to be possessed by someone in our world? Will it appear in this place now, or will it come to another place in the distant future or past? There's so much to research, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to pin it down. Because the magical power of the aspect that controls space and time is inherently uncontrollable, because it is a magic that challenges the providence of the world that no one has tried before, because it is an area of exploration where everything remains unknown, and even if I were to be summoned, I don't even know if it can really bring about meaningful change in the world. Then there is nothing you can be sure of. How are you going to solve such a huge problem like that? But you can't just do nothing. Shouldn't we try every possibility that comes to hand, even if it means grasping at straws? Even though life is noble, life is also precious. I don't accept death at all. I don't want to accept the end of the world casually. I have no desire to submit to that fate. Sylvania Robster has no doubt that humanity can escape the promised end. They do not run away in fear or cry and lament. The fear of darkness tries to encroach on my mind, but I shake it off without hesitation. Appear in front of the public with a smile on your face. I am sure it won't be a problem. It is said that the peaceful era will continue. Nevertheless, he continues his research to resist the providence of the world. Secretly from the public with the support of Crown Prince Linfel, he stays in the laboratory and develops calculation formulas all day long. Go out to the Ramal Mountains and observe the stars from the top of the mountain to calculate the flow of magical power. Occasionally, the magical powers of the aspects can be used to observe other worlds and once again confirm the promised end of this world. Eventually, after dedicating a long time, he completes a summoning circle that summons the existence of another world. However, the observed flow of the world does not change. We are still heading towards a cliff where the future is filled with endless darkness. Still, Sylvania pays no heed and implements the summoning circle again. I keep doing more research and trying it again and again, but there is still no thought of changing the future trend. Still, he did not give up hope and tried several times, but in the end, Prince Linfel was the first to fail. A few times, no matter how many times you try, it doesn't work. After all, it is a meaningless struggle. It was foolish to try to resist the providence of the world. Prince, it's useless. It's useless. This doesn't mean anything. Prince Linfel eventually hits the desk in frustration and despair. He pushes his arm and pushes away all the research books and documents on the desk, and then tears out his head and shouts, "I had no doubt that you were the savior who would save the world. Only you I thought there was no one but you who could stop this promised apocalypse. The same goes for you too. We were already done. We cannot escape this despair." Sylvania could not continue speaking as she watched the prince tearing out his hair. It's not that I don't understand that distant despair and fear. The reason Prince Linfel was able to maintain his sanity was because the deep darkness was in the distant future when it had not yet arrived, because she knows that her own life will end before that end. Therefore, I was able to move only with a sense of duty to save the world. If the fear was right around the corner, there would have been nothing I could have done other than lock myself in my room and shiver. But even though there was still quite a bit of time to move, Crown Prince Linfel could do nothing. Soon, the emptiness begins to eat the crown prince. He felt that no matter how he lived his life, and how much merit he made, his future would eventually be consumed by darkness. We lose the will to live a meaningful life. Even Sylvania is kicked out of the imperial family. He gives up his desire for imperial power and disappears into history. Eventually, on the day she was kicked out of the imperial family, rumors about Sylvania circulated among the public. No matter how great the sage Sylvania was, in the end, she couldn't be free from the serious crime of directly hurting the crown prince. He whispered that as he watched Sylvania being exiled to Aiken Island. This is enough to last a long time. Sylvania did not bother to explain the truth. However, as he left for Aiken Island, he smiled brightly. The distant future that we have observed over and over again eventually converges into endless darkness. Various types of flows that I saw countless times in the process. Even though I observed all those cases, I never felt frustrated because I wanted someone to remember me. Where are the eyes of Sylvania, the great sage, wielding a staff, widen? A huge dark giant appears as if to show off and curves around the plaza at the entrance to the living building, waving its arms. Magical power covers the entire plaza of the living quarters, and an ink-colored blade rises from the darkness, and flies into Sylvania's defense line, blocking it. Ka ga 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 ga. As Glaskin straightens up his massive body, the shadowy form of the devil comes into full view. It's not a trick. It actually exists before your eyes. Yenika Palova, who overcame her trauma on her own, is the highest-ranking dark spirit that appeared in the world entirely with her own power. Sylvania was momentarily taken aback by the dark energy that hit her body. Just like that, Sylvania falls from the spire and gets stuck in a small shopping building next to the square. Bang! Sylvania, who had barely managed to collect herself from the rising dust, still had surprised eyes. Sylvania Robster was not simply surprised to see that gigantic, demon-shaped monster. The Delheim hourglass, an invention of his student Felona Bloomriver, never saw the light of day. Lucy Merrill, who did not understand the fighting style of the weak, was ultimately crushed by the difference in power and had to be defeated. Yenika Failover experienced a huge failure and ended up in a state of frustration that she could never overcome again. In the thousands of future streams that I looked into over and over again through constellation magic, while holed up in the Lily Palace laboratory, variables that have never been observed are revealing themselves one after another. Sylvania looks up from the rubble of the collapsed building. It's strange. There are so many strange things. The fear of darkness encroaching on my head shakes my head to say otherwise, but Sylvania speaks while shaking her cloudy pupils. Isn't this a strange thing? I repeat this to myself. And the strangest thing of all, the blond man who was sitting against the collapsed outer wall of the Trix building and glaring at Sylvania Robster. The poison that flowed from those eyes was imprinted in her memory and constantly stimulated Sylvania's consciousness. Madness surges back, grabbing hold of the mind that had been engulfed in darkness for a long time. Raising her magical power, she raises herself up again. As you float into the sky, you can see Yenika Palova sitting inside the magic circle, clutching her staff tightly. The eyes that always seemed gentle and kind are now looking at Sylvania more aggressively than ever. My head has turned completely white here and there, and dark imprints are creeping up my skin. Both eyes are strong. Sylvania manifests high-level elemental magic. All kinds of magic, including fire, wind, water, and land, fluctuated and flew toward Glaskin. Dark magic appears, and most of it is neutralized, but some magic hits effectively. The elemental magic that hits Glaskin's body causes a huge explosion, covering the entire area with light. However, the opponent is an elemental spirit of the highest rank. They don't care about that level of attack. The dark magic flying towards Sylvania soon covered the square. Quagwang, bang, bang, hwara. The rising dark red flame burns everything in the world equally. A black flame spell that only Glaskin can use. It is a pure dark flame that equally burns away not only material things, but also magical power. However, it cannot respond to Sylvania's aspect magic. In an instant, Sylvania broke through the space curtain that surrounded her body and was once again at the top of the spire unharmed. Dealing with that giant still requires quite a bit of effort. This is especially because it is a dark spirit that is not good at elemental compatibility. But that doesn't mean you can't win. It just takes a bit of work. That was the moment I thought about it. Before you know it, the entrance plaza is filled with water. I noticed it too late because of the deep darkness, as if there was a flood. Water was constantly flowing over the surface of the square, gradually covering the area. Yenika Failover, who was sitting in the center, was submerged in water almost up to her knees. Spirit ceremony, water source manifestation. However, its scale is different from that used by Ed Rothtailor's spirit lasher. No matter where you end up, that place is the sea. There is a legendary spirit called that. It is a mythical giant spirit that eats giant monsters in the deep sea and chews up and swallows even reefs. Freed, the highest-ranking water spirit. This is the name of the gigantic whale that suffered from high fever for over a week and even lost its eyesight, even though it was summoned with the power of the Phoenix Ring. There is a legend that the legendary spiritist Delcrom from the mythical era once summoned two highest-ranking spirits at once. However, the ridiculous feat was often perceived as exaggerated to elevate the spirit of the mythical hero. This is because no matter how well a person is born with the temperament of a spiritist, there are human limitations. However, with both hands together and holding the staff tightly, the sight of Yenika concentrating her mind is heartfelt. If he, an ordinary human being, wanted to tie the feet of Sylvania Robster, a historical figure, I thought I had to do something like this. At the point when something like this was possible in the first place, he was definitely not an ordinary human being. As if her thoughts couldn't reach that point, Yenica just poured out her blood and gathered her mental power. Blood pours like a waterfall. Even amidst the dripping blood, his eyes are wide open. Holding the staff tightly with trembling hands, I clearly feel my entire body's spirit response burning. Ooh! It was closer to the beating sound of a huge sailing ship rather than a sound made by a spirit. The size of the whale that breaks through the floor of the huge square and leaps into the sky, it easily overwhelms a few decent buildings. It seemed as if rain was pouring from the sky as streams of water rose due to Fried's descent. Just by appearing, Fried appears with hundreds of lower-level spirits in tow. Looking at the army of spirits rising next to the huge whale soaring into the sky, it is as if you are watching a fleet guarding and reigning over a huge mother ship. Spirits of all kinds rise up together with the enormous whale spirit and fly around Glasgow trying to cover the sky. Is this the present world or the spirit world where spirits gather? An army so vast that it is impossible to distinguish between them covers the world. As the monsters filling the sky are swept away, all kinds of elemental spirits soar against the backdrop of the roaring Velbrock. Sylvania was standing on the broken spire looking straight up at the scene. Yenica Palova lowered her head. As blood pours out, a high fever rises. I am in pain as all 5 senses are burning, but I do not relax my body. Not only did I run out of magical energy, but I was on the verge of using up all the strength I needed to maintain life. The reason I am shaking is because I don't even have the strength left to breathe. I could barely see in front of my eyes, and even my sense of touch had become weak. Still, Yenica Failova does not fall. There is only one reason why she persists in doing such ridiculous things as her work, because she has something to protect. Its appearance is very different from the Yenica Palova that Sylvania knows. With Fried's raw, Glaskin's highest-ranking dark magic attacks Sylvania, attacks that cannot be blocked with normal magical power, and even the firepower and volume are far beyond the scope of common sense. Sylvania first raised her star power. The magical power of an aspect that can ignore the providence of the world, can suppress all elemental magic, no matter how far beyond common sense. Great Sage Sylvania is a wizard who does not understand the logic of power in the first place. In the end, it's just a matter of how effectively you can suppress even the armies of spirits that are rising as if they're going to cover the world. Dark red magical energy swirls around the spire. Even after using an unbelievable amount of aspect magic dozens of times, the amount of magic power still shows no sign of drying up. The sound of Bellbroke's roar covers Aiken Island, and the breath it emits passes through hundreds of spirits in the sky. Fried, who is swimming in the sky, full of spirits, as if it were outer space, sweeps away hordes of monsters with a single wave of her tail. Inside, Sylvania opens her eyes. The dark madness creeping up her body whispers in her ear. Death is like a comfortable rest for those who struggle meaninglessly. A helping hand to help us escape from the vicious cycle of endless suffering in a useless life. The deep frustration of being buried in darkness for a long time and not being able to endure until the end, not knowing the limits, brings out magical power. Highest aspect magic void. The aspect magic that covers the entire area spreads throughout Aiken Island. It's hard to believe that such a small body contained such magical power. Sylvania raises her wand and smiles bitterly, thinking, I didn't want to do this, but I really can't help it now. Even the scope of the magic of nihilism that erases existence itself is vast. It is the most powerful aspect magic that even Sylvania, a master of aspect magic, and a rare genius, cannot control properly unless she makes up her mind. After using it once, the after-effects are very severe. Therefore, it was magic on such a massive scale that even Sylvania avoided using it as much as possible. The power to turn even the enormous spirit army that is covering the entire world into non-existence. It is a power that holds in its hands and shakes the providence of a world where its very existence is denied just by its manifestation. Yenica Failova is prepared to face death, but even that would be useless in front of Sylvania, the sole intention of providing comfortable rest. With that alone, Sylvania raises her eyes and stretches her hands toward the sky. All of this will end in an instant like a candle blowing out. That was the moment I thought about it. Hwara. Quackagagak. Aspect magic can only be countered by aspect magic. That major premise has never been broken down. At most, only the creator of this world can deny the absolute nature of aspect magic, which cannot be countered by any other compatibility. However, Sylvania's aspect magic is overwhelmed by the enormous amount of aspect magic. It is so massive that it rises above Aiken Island and threatens to overwhelm the spirit's army. There was no way in this world that an aspect magic user could overcome that level of magical power. Sylvania opens her eyes wide and looks at the source of magical power, the top of the half-destroyed building on the outskirts of the residential building. Lucy Merrill, covered in blood, is standing there barely able to keep herself together. The phoenix ring is shining in the hand that is tightly held between the dripping blood. The principle is also taken from aspect magic, so Sylvania knows it well. A magic tool that draws magical energy from the future into the present and forcibly inflates the magical power. Why does Lucy Merrill have it? This may also be a future that has never been observed. Even if it is the same magic tool, its effectiveness varies depending on who uses it. Lucy Merrill, a genius who ruled the world without magic tools, brings the magical power promised in the future into the present. Even that is not an amount of a few days or months. At least 1 year or 3 to 5 years. Lucy Merrill, who can recover the magic power of hundreds of people in just a few days, must have accumulated years to gain how enormous the amount of magic power must be. Lucy Merrill no longer looks back. The difficult future of having to live without magical power for the next few years is not even considered. Survive right now. If you have a reason to live, you will use whatever means you have. The girl with a lot of blood and blood, united with that single thought, raises her eerily calm eyes. The amount of magical power flowing into the ring is already at an astronomical level. Nevertheless, after continuously collecting and gathering magical power, the ring eventually began to crack, unable to withstand the enormous amount of magical power. Still, Lucy doesn't care. No matter how much magical power he musters, it will not be enough if he is going to deal with Sylvania. The sound of Fried's heartbeat echoes in the sky, along with Bellbroke's roar. The giant Glaskin who has raised his magic power wipes out the monsters and spreads evil laughter throughout the sky. And when Sylvania closed her eyes for a moment, Lucy Merrill, who was far away on the other side, had arrived right in front of us. Lucy Merrill, who has gathered magical power into her fingertips, leans in and speaks. There's something that old man used to say. Have we already thrown away things like honorifics? It was even before Sylvania could react to that truly Lucy Merrill-like attitude. He said he had the worst teacher. When I think back to Sylvania, I remember the sight of the old man sitting in front of the campfire. Glarkt was always kind and caring towards Lucy, but there were times when his tone became blunt when telling anecdotes about Sylvania. Still, his face was smiling. His expression was probably reminiscing about the best teacher he had ever met in his life. Quarang. As a huge amount of aspect magic struck Sylvania, fell from the spire again. Even though it gets stuck in the building next door, its magic power still overflows. Nevertheless, Sylvania was slowly moving slowly. A fragment from Sylvania's memory speaks to her. I remember meeting a boy wizard who had lost the will to live in an empty life. There is also a memory of a huge wolf spirit looking down at the beach, as if bored on peaceful Aiken Island. I also remember setting up an academy and teaching magical magic in a simple classroom with only a blackboard and desks. If I think about it, I lived that kind of life too. It wasn't that I always went back and forth between the Lily Palace laboratory and Prince Lienfeld's office, worrying about the grand future. The memories rising from the dust are a record of Sylvania's struggles. The future will not change and will ultimately lead to catastrophe. We're done now. Stop this pointless struggle. There is nothing you can do but accept death. With a cry of despair, Prince Lienfeld kicks the desk and knocks it over. Surrounded by fear and futility, he tears out his head, saying that all of this is pointless. Hundreds of Glaskin's dark arrows hit. Even when Sylvania is pinned against the exterior wall of a building, she quickly activates her defensive formation and blocks everything. However, Lucy jumps in and delivers a follow-up blow, shattering the defensive line. At the same time, the memories of frustration digging into her mind threaten to eat away at Sylvania again. The voice that had told me over and over again that there was no point in having any more hope tried to block my thoughts again. Lucy, who has regained her magical power, is hit with high-level elemental magic to block her movements, and the direction of the next-level magic is directed to the main body of Yenica, who is in charge of all the supplies. The greatest weakness of a spiritist is that they only need to suppress the main body that is using elemental arts. However, Lucy Merrill draws out the magic power of her entire body and changes the direction of Sylvania's magic. Lucy's struggles, which appear to be half-conscious, are all effective. I am resisting Sylvania's magic with my teeth clenched. Lucy, who has neutralized all of Sylvania's elemental magic, leaps again while putting on her large witch hat. Numerous explosion formations around Sylvania exploded all at once. Sylvania quickly used her magical power to absorb all the shock, but she was unable to cope with Fried's high-level water magic that followed. The sound of Fried's heartbeat once again cuts through the skies of Aiken Island. The highest level of water magic is undersea pressure. Wherever Fried is, that is the sea. As if to prove that fact, the spreading pressure of the deep sea covers the entire area. Everywhere the magic touches is covered with unbearable pressure. Due to Sylvania's small size, if it is hit directly by the pressure of the distant deep sea, it will die instantly. I tried to pull out her magic again and somehow hold on, but I couldn't stop her from falling to the floor under the pressure. Quarang! Sylvania's reason, with only the fragments remaining, whispers to her buried among the rubble of the building. Were all those years of sitting at a desk, peeking into the future and observing the apocalypse really meaningless? Was resisting the futility that overshadows life just a meaningless struggle? I thought I already had the answer to that question, a future that had never been observed in the distant past. Those present beings who are resisting with unexpected power. It poses a new question to Sylvania, which has experienced dozens and hundreds of setbacks, even though I observed all the future flows extending into thousands of branches over and over again. What if there was a branch of the flow that I had never seen before? It's so weak and pointless that you wonder if it's even possible to extend beyond that huge cliff still, if you say it definitely exists. The variable in this world that turned all future trends upside down. What is a drop of water that falls into closed, lukewarm water? Who do you mean? The answer was decided from the beginning. Quack. Ed Rothdeller, covered in blood, rises from the rubble of the building on the other side. As he limped through the dust, he held a dagger in one hand and what little magical energy was left in his other hand. Amidst the falling dust, he glared at Sylvania with his precious eyes. His goal has not changed since then. It's not that complicated, it's not that great, it's not that grand. Trying to explain it now will only make your mouth hurt. Just take a deep breath and straighten your head. Although it was stained with blood, its will never broke. Chapter 246, Battle of Bellbroke, 14. A neatly decorated laboratory on Aiken Island late at night. Sylvania Robster opens a book that compiles records on aspect magic that he has studied throughout his life. He had just finished writing the grimoire that would later be called the Sage's Seal and became the subject of research. We will soon be locked in a time prison and go to see with our own eyes the future of darkness. It will be a long fight against the darkness, but I can only encourage myself that I will be able to endure it somehow. I tried to summon a being who would open up a future in which all possibilities were closed in some way. I lived in pursuit of that possibility with the feeling of grasping at straws. I spent my whole life studying aspect magic to summon a man who was living in loneliness in a world beyond the light of a distant star. I couldn't even confirm the results of that effort. How the man will arrive in this world, when he will arrive, whether it will lead to meaningful results, nothing is certain. Just do what you can in your current position. I could only know fragmentary information about the man who observed and looked at the world beyond the distant stars. The man who lived surrounded by mechanical devices in a world filled with countless buildings rising toward the sky was always in danger of his life. Even in the midst of the deaths of numerous colleagues, he did not let go of his own life. Even though I experienced several setbacks and was immersed in grief and sadness, I tried to live the life I was given to the end. He is a person who tried to survive until the end, no matter what frustration and despair he faced. So even if Sylvania cannot be observed now, if it comes to this world one day, it will survive to the end in some way and open up new possibilities. So I'm writing with a quill towards a man who might show up someday. The story is told out of respect for the man who will definitely survive and stand at the end of the stage. Preface to the wise man's seal. At the beginning of the book, which contained entirely his life, he slowly wrote down words to him. You who survived. Ed Rosteller stands up from the rubble and cheers. I had to do something to raise my body, which was already covered in blood. Even in the midst of despair, the will burns. Against the backdrop of an army of spirits filling the sky, a third-rate extra, neither a protagonist nor anything else, stands up. The end of that long journey where you had to risk your life at every moment may be very different from what you thought. Ed Rosteller gathers magical power to the bottom and makes Merrilda, the high-ranking wind spirit, appear once again. Blood poured out of the mouth, and a trickle of blood flowed from the ear. Even while glaring straight at Sylvania through blurred eyes, the giant wind wolf stands up. Sylvania held her breath as she realized that the wolf's shape looked vaguely familiar. But what doesn't change is that you went through a long and difficult journey and were able to survive and stand proudly at the end. Embarrassed, Sylvania stuttered her movements. Normally, I would have pulled out my magical power in an instant, but the embarrassing feelings, shaking my brain, prevented me from thinking. Ed Rosteller manifests elemental magic, as is. The wind blade, which is just basic elemental magic, hits Sylvania's right arm. A drop of blood fluttered in the air. Sylvania clutches the wound on her right arm, unable to believe that such basic magic was allowed. Even the waves of high-level magic that covered the sky couldn't hurt her. However, just looking at the man standing upright, Sylvania could not stop her pupils from shaking. Perhaps the person standing in the middle of this future trend, where everything has changed, is that man, Ed Rothtaler. Are you happy that you survived? I remember the preface I wrote in the laboratory on Aiken Island, my place of exile, occasionally looking at the starry sky outside the window. Or are you afraid that you will have to continue living a life filled with pain and suffering? Memories of the days when I went to sleep believing that one day, a man who would somehow break through the future where everything was blocked would arrive. Have you found your reason for living? Was it a life worth living? What have you gained and what have you lost? What succeeded and what failed? What did the joy when you were happy and the despair when you were frustrated make you? The contents of the letter I sent to the man from the distant future, thinking that he would survive until the end and arrive, are engraved in my mind. The man survived. He survived and reached the end of the stage. The journey was long, arduous, and difficult. Nevertheless, I have never once accepted death. Why on earth do we continue to cling to this life, which will only end in vain when it ends? Taylor and Isla Ziggs leave Offaly's hall with Elvira. Freed flies up, looks toward the square where Glaskin is rampaging, and runs out. Supporting actress Belle Meyer thinks as she sends them away. I hope they are safe. I hope you endure until the end, survive, and put an end to that disaster. What is the reason for trying to change the journey in a life with a fixed end? Sword demon Clevius breaks through the crowd of monsters and reaches the square. After cutting down hundreds of monsters by himself, he rushes into the square, driven by blood-drenched madness. Dyke, who was following him, runs out with his fists clenched. The combat club students also run towards the battlefield, subduing the monsters that Clevius was unable to deal with. Why do we struggle so futilely to survive? Lortel Ketchelm leads a group of merchants and mercenaries into the battlefield. I advance towards the plaza with my magic power, fighting through the flocks of flying monsters. When they encounter a group of knights from the Cathedral of St. Claris approaching from the opposite direction, they end communication by nodding their heads, then join forces and run toward the square. This book is a record of the agony over the answer. Princess Fenia and Princess Selaha separate. Fenia is looking at Belbroke, and Selaha is supporting the Emperor. Those who want to end the situation and those who want to protect the Emperor's well-being. Although the two people's values were clearly different, they could not single out one answer and say it was the wrong answer. That's how people get mixed up. Some were lead roles and some were supporting roles. While there are those who parade brilliantly under the spotlight on stage, there are also those who live their lives to the best of their ability below the surface. Even if it doesn't receive the light of the light, it's definitely there. It's like everyone's life. Tanya Rosteller, who has entered the plaza, Professor Callide, who is clearing the way to protect the students by subduing the monsters, Obel Forcier, who is chained to the altar of replacement, and holding the last remaining piece of the seal, and Traciana, who is guarding a group of students from the Ministry of Magic. Bloom River also looks up at the sky, which is full of spirits and aspect magic. Since when did I stop feeling fear from Bellbroke's roar? They were resisting, just with the determination to survive. Quang. Sylvania quickly responded to Merelda's wind magic. I ended up allowing the attack for a moment out of embarrassment for no apparent reason, but I wasn't so absorbed that I even allowed a follow-up hit. He raised his staff and gathered more star power, but Lucy, who jumped down from the spire, landed on the floor and used the high-ranking lightning magic Never's punishment. Huok Quang. Even before the after-effects of the lightning disappeared, a spirit-style dark blade rose from the ground and attempted to pierce Sylvania. However, Sylvania unleashes a defensive attack with a reaction speed that exceeds human limits and throws them all away. Yenica, looking haggard, stands up. He was staring into space with empty eyes, as if he had already lost his eyesight, but he could clearly feel the flow of magical energy. We have already figured out where Sylvania is. Sylvania tries to fly into the sky to escape Ed's spirit range. It was a moment to gather the magic power of the aspect and leap through space itself. I tried to raise the magic power of the aspect, but once again the magic power raised by Lucy was suppressed. Where Lucy's voice was so calm that it gave me goosebumps even as the blood flowed so hard that it covered my vision. She is barely able to raise her body with her back bent, and although she appears to be barely conscious, she is clearly showing hostility. He's on the verge of losing his mind because he has gathered all of his future magic power. Nevertheless, they are united in their determination to firmly subdue Sylvania. Sylvania took a deep breath and raised her wand again. First of all, in order to use aspect magic, Lucy had to be subdued first. This is because Lucy was the only person who could actually suppress Sylvania's magic power. Lucy is dying. Just one direct hit with proper elemental magic can completely overpower it. It was a moment to bring out general magic power. Hua, that brief moment when Yenica blocked the monsters and Lucy blocked Sylvania's magic power. At this moment, there was only one person who could draw out the magic power of each aspect. Ed Rosteller activates force gathering using the magical power of the aspect that he forcibly drew. Aspect magic can only be countered by aspect magic. However, Sylvania's magic power, Lucy, who was already on the verge of losing consciousness, was forcibly suppressing it. Sylvania's body is sucked back into Ed Rosteller. He plunges the dagger into Sylvania's shoulder once again, as she is forced into range. Qa. Without even giving himself a chance to scream in pain, Ed placed his weight on the dagger. Now my body's strength was all gone, so it was difficult to deliver an effective blow unless I had to apply weight. Aha, the pain rising from the shoulder where the dagger was embedded invades Sylvania's mind. Before he can draw out his magic again, while looking at his shoulder with blood flowing out, Ed throws Sylvania over and gets on top of her. Kerkahak, rolling on the floor while being stabbed by a dagger. As the wound heals, a moan of pain comes out of Sylvania's mouth. After plucking the dagger from Sylvania's shoulder, he once again summoned all his body's strength to strike down the dagger he was holding with both hands. At that moment, Kang, Ed's dagger was blocked by the staff that Sylvania barely raised. Sylvania was trembling because of the stab wound from the dagger, and Ed had already strained his body to its limit, so he could not exert any more strength. Because of the strangely balanced balance of power, Ed's dagger cannot go any further. The dagger aimed between Sylvania's eyes was trembling, going up and down repeatedly. Ed's blood drips down on Sylvania's face. Ed's eyes, visible beneath the shadow of his flowing bangs, are still full of the will to survive. The two fought for a long time with the trembling dagger between them. It was clear that if his arms relaxed even a little, the dagger would come out in an instant, as he was trying to gather magical power. Sylvania was pushing the balance of power to the side, while suppressing the pain rising from her shoulder in order to somehow get rid of this dagger. However, Ed was already completely exhausted, so he gritted his teeth and pushed the dagger towards Sylvania with barely any strength. Sylvania also knows those eyes. The records of the man Sylvania saw long ago slowly, it begins to seep into my memories. The man was a soldier wandering around the battlefield. I met many people on the front line where bullets came and went. Meeting people of different nationalities and with different purposes for entering the battlefield, we sometimes laughed, fought, and made up again. I even thought that he was more than just a comrade in arms. He was like family. And all those relationships met death. In the middle of a battlefield where blood flows like a river, a man clutches his head and trembles amid gunshots. The friend I was sharing bread with was rolling on the floor with his head pierced. The amulet containing his family photos, which he considered a treasure, is buried in the mud. A female military officer, who had quite a crush on the man, was killed by a grenade fragment while hiding him in the grass. Thanks to the officer's sacrifice, the man and his colleague survive by hiding together in the forest. However, the seriously injured colleague has difficulty moving and cannot move. The man carries his colleague across the midnight forest on his back in an attempt to somehow save his life. But in the end, the colleague dies from excessive bleeding on the man's back. Now the man doesn't even have any colleagues left. There was no family to begin with. In an empty life, a man holds a gun to his head. Continuing to live a meaningless life is only going to be difficult. However, the man shakes his head, grits his teeth, and lowers the gun. He somehow survives the battlefield and returns to his unit. So we are sent to another battlefield, meet new colleagues, build friendships, and watch them die. Sometimes you save your comrades, sometimes you can't. Some people die, and some people live. In the boundary between life and death, the man somehow continues his life. That's how the man ultimately survived the waves of war. Although he achieved a remarkable record and was praised for his achievements, he never regained feeling in his thigh where he had been hit by a bullet. Returning to society as a wounded soldier, he is ordered to spend the rest of his life in the peaceful arms of his native country. Having lived his entire life surrounded by gunfire, he was unfamiliar with the city centers of his home country, filled with tall buildings and peaceful people. When I try to fall asleep in my peaceful city home, the faces of my dead colleagues appear beyond my eyelids. I open my eyes wide at dawn, go out to the living room, drink cold water, and fight off the nausea that is rising for no reason. Although he suffers from hallucinations and is in pain for a long time, he somehow survives the long, dark night. If you hold on like that, the morning sun will rise. The light of dawn shines even beyond the windows of a small office building. Even though the dark night is long, morning always comes. The man reads a book, sit by the window and listen to music, drink coffee. I happily chat on the phone with my surviving comrades, do rehabilitation exercises, clean the room, play games, open the window to ventilate, provide food to your puppy, take a shower, change your clothes, assemble new furniture, repair a broken vacuum cleaner, check your mail, eat roughly prepared rice. Sometimes I think of the time I held a gun to my head in a rainy forest. The man falls into contemplation as he thinks about the muzzle of the gun he managed to lower. I don't know why he did that, but he didn't end his life even though he didn't see any reason to live. After that, my life didn't change much. My life was not turned upside down, and all the worries I was living with like a chronic disease were not resolved. Life just went on like that. So I just lived my life as it went on. Only then did the man realize. Even though it felt uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that don't fit, I have gradually become accustomed to it and am enjoying it naturally. I was able to get a good night's sleep, even in a place where I couldn't hear gunshots all day long. The images of my dead comrades, who had shimmered when I closed my eyes, were suddenly recalled as smiling comfortably. It doesn't change that much overnight, but when you come to your senses at some point, it becomes that way. That's what living is like. Kang, phew. Ed Rosteller's dagger digs into Sylvania's opposite shoulder. Even if Ed Rosteller is in a near-death state, it is not easy for the diminutive Sylvania to block a dagger that is thrust forward with all its weight. As she pushes away the blade of the dagger that is slowly sinking into the wound, Sylvania slowly opens her mouth. Hey, Ed's eyes widen at the surprisingly refreshing voice, and he looks at Sylvania. Since when did it start? The light of reason shines in those crazy eyes. Ed's blood was dripping down his pure white cheek and was heading to the floor. A question you must have asked yourself countless times while sailing on a long journey, trapped in the dark. I was afraid to hear the answer, so I said those words to Ed. Did I live a life worth living? A life lived with one's head held high until the end among people who bowed their heads and said it was nothing more than a meaningless struggle. Was it worth it? Ed Rosteller tried to say something to Sylvania with his eyes downcast. Whatever it is, I feel like the moment I say it out loud, it will just become lip service. Ed Rosteller didn't laugh or cry, but just nodded slowly, with an expressionless face as always. Just that small affirmation made Sylvania Robster close her eyes and shed tears. Ed's hand holding the dagger loses strength. Ed was slowly losing consciousness. Velbroke's roar filled the sky once more, and magic cannons swept across Aiken Island. The power that extended from the western coastal area across the island, with the power to devastate the island. Its effects even reached the entrance plaza, where the battle was in full swing. Ed also almost got caught up in the aftermath, but magical power instantly bloomed around Sylvania and Ed. The two people, who were covered by the high-level magic space curtain, were able to escape the impact safely. Chapter 247, Battle of Bellbroke. 15. No matter what happens to the people off stage, the story on stage continues. The moment Ed Rosteller and Sylvania disappeared into the space curtain, the battle suddenly quieted down. Yenneker, who was completely in a state of death, fell to the ground, and the spirits that covered the sky disappeared one by one. The same goes for Lucy. The ring he was wearing on his hand was unable to withstand the astronomical amount of magical power and shattered into pieces. He stumbles and heads towards the direction where Ed disappeared, but eventually falls to the floor. There is no longer anyone who can stop the monsters that cover the sky. Once again, Bellbroke's monster tribe covers the skies over Aiken Island. There seems to be no end. Even though I tried to kill it like that, it keeps coming. However, human resistance also does not end. New forces invade the square, where only the dying Yenneker and Lucy remain. The cathedral knights led by Saint Clarice, the top mercenaries centered around Lord Lortel, the blood-crazed sword spirit Clevius, a group of combat club students following Dyke, and student members led by Tanya Rosteller I. They arrive two by one and participate in the battle. We advance to the center of the square, suppressing the crowds of monsters. Withstanding the magic of Velbrock that flew in from time to time and neutralizing the magic thrown by the monsters, they headed toward the center of the battlefield. The first person to arrive was Lortel Ketchelm, the acting head of the Elt Chamber of Commerce. Lortel discovers blood stains under the collapsed spire, the spirit of Ed's magical energy, and the fallen Yenneker and Lucy. He gives instructions to the mercenary unit of the company to take care of the two people and calmly assesses the situation. The numerous spirits and traces of aspect magic seen just now mean that a fierce battle took place. Here, Yenneker and Lucy fought a bloody battle, helping Ed right up to the point of death. It was not a bloody battle that took place on stage under the spotlight. A fight off stage that only people in the know about. However, it must have been such an intense battle that its ferocity was incomparable to any other battle. Lortel is a generation of shining protagonists. Therefore, it is not Lortel's stage. Lortel quietly looks up at the sky. Bellbroke was struggling in chains. Perhaps that gigantic Xianchengriang is the final enemy that everyone's anticipated hero must defeat. Walking along the path of the hero is the path. If you walk steadily along the unfolding path, a bright and beautiful ending will await you. However, those standing next to Ed Rothdeller are ultimately the ones below the stage. I quietly look at Yenneker and Lucy, who are all in disrepair. Although the two continued their fierce and arduous fight, they ultimately fought next to the man. This is the crucial difference between Lortel and the two. The fact that the stage you are standing on is different, which ultimately creates a strange gap at important points. I wasn't used to the distance, so a lonely and absurd feeling began to rise in my heart, and then I slowly smiled. I am sorry, but I have never lived according to the correct answer. It reminds me of Ed Rosteller, who was obsessed with graduating and until then was only focused on survival. Wasn't it Lortel who, with a seductive smile, declared that he would snatch you away when the time came? Starting from a group of poor people who were told to give up their dreams of becoming wealthy, they have reached the peak of wealth. Lortel Ketchelm was already accustomed to resisting what he called fate and destiny. Moreover, the end of the stage is just around the corner. Did you think you would be frustrated here? While picking up the injured Yenneker and Lucy, Lortel lowered his head beneath his robe and smiled. Siang Changryang Velbroke. If the thing blocking the way between Ed Rothdeller and his stage is that huge monster, all you have to do is get rid of it. When the curtain falls, the stage ends. When the stage ends, the shining leads also come down. Lortle smiles coquettishly while looking at the stairs leading down to the stage. The stage prepared by Ed Ross Taylor is in its final stages. When everything is done, you go down the stairs and slowly seep into the world the man lives in. Eventually, the Bellbroke subjugation team, led by Taylor, stormed into the square, and everyone finally gathered in one place. Taylor McLaura Isla Tris Fenia Elias Clole Lortle Ketchelm 6 Eppelstein Clevius Nortondale Elvira Aniston. The generation of protagonists, each with their own circumstances in their arms, gather in one place and look up at the roaring Bellbroke. The stage curtain slowly rises. Taylor McLaura will win. He was the main character. When I opened my eyes, barely able to control my blurred vision, I found myself in a pure white space. Had he completely lost consciousness? I looked around in a dazed state for a moment. I frowned for a moment at the sudden pain in my body, but I was able to hold on somehow. There was nothing much to see. I was sitting on a simple wooden chair. That was everything in this pure white space. And there was a familiar-looking girl sitting on the chair opposite. He had shed a lot of blood, just like me, and his luxurious-looking wizard's robes were also covered in red blood. The girl with her pure white hair neatly down is the great sage Sylvania Robster. When she saw that I had opened my eyes, Sylvania closed her eyes and seemed to be contemplating what to say. I was the one who spoke first. Since when did you come to your senses? It must have been more difficult than expected to face the fear in the abyss with no end in eons of time. So there was no need to argue. From around the time I saw Glaskin, Sylvania's voice was thinner than expected. It is quite different from when I was consumed by madness and lost my reason. However, with his eyes downcast and a dark expression on his face, he did not look very confident. I was feeling uncomfortable even before that. I guess I was thinking that my life was just a series of futile struggles as I was slowly being eaten away in the abyss. It's worth it. I sympathized with him, but did not necessarily offer comfort. The only person who can comfort Sylvania Robster is herself. I placed my weight on the back of the chair, feeling that my body was no longer strong. It's a gap in space. If you hide inside the space curtain, you can be completely separated from the outside world and free from all damage and influence. You have all kinds of amazing experiences. I slowly put strength on my lower back and moved my head forward. Then, the strength in my lower back suddenly disappeared, so I was able to speak with my arms resting on my knees and my head down. Your life was not meaningless, because I am here, not comforting or anything, just telling the truth. I am the proof. It's not that I have a duty to protect, but I still say that much. Even if he is a great sage of the century, he is ultimately just a human being. That was all she wanted to check. Sylvania slowly put down her wand and nodded. It seemed like I was trying to hold it in, but the tears that were in my eyes slowly leaked out. She lived to save the world. Then I failed a lot, went crazy, and made a lot of mistakes. But we finally reached it. We have found a branch of the future that allows us to move beyond the distant cliffs. It is you who has reached the end of the journey, not me. Sylvania Robster. With that in mind, I nodded. Then now is the time to finish. Actually, I thought it was about time. I am so glad you came to this world. Is it time? The providence of the world is not that simple. The total number of souls allowed in the world is ultimately determined. If you summoned a soul from another world, the soul would have to disappear from this world in proportion to its weight. Because there are limits to twisting providence, permanent extinction through aspect magic. It is a magic that twists providence itself and makes it become something that never existed. Sylvania speaks while gathering the magic power of the aspect. Many people died because I was immature. The purpose is to save the world. Although he lived his entire life for that noble purpose, that does not justify the lives he sacrificed because of his own fault. Sylvania was that kind of person. I will destroy Bellbroke and make him leave this world. The seat I left empty is yours. Sylvania stands up and talks to me. Thank you for coming and for surviving. I'll take care of the rest. I just wanted to say that. Thank you for surviving, for gritting your teeth and holding on until the end, so I just want to thank you. Sylvania says that and slowly turns around. Perhaps he wants to put an end to this disaster. In this way, Bellbroke is overpowered by Sylvania, and the world moves forward with the hope of overcoming the cliff. There is no place for Sylvania there, but the result of saving the world remains. That's enough. Sylvania was able to smile just by confirming that her fate, which she had been struggling with her entire life, was not a meaningless struggle. Hey, of course, I was not convinced by that statement. Leaving my body with almost no strength, I sang Sylvania with full force in my voice. I completely understand your position. Because you had to struggle to save your world why you suddenly called me, and why I had to endure all kinds of crises, I can understand everything. From her perspective, it must have been a struggle to save the world. It may have been part of a desperate struggle to survive. Let's say you give in 100 times and understand everything, but there remains a part that can never be understood. Then what world was I in? Ha! You said with your own mouth that if the total amount of the soul is not balanced, providence will be distorted. So who maintains the balance of the world I left behind? How are you going to fill the position I left empty? Close your eyes. What I still remember are the relationships I left behind in the previous world. I had very few acquaintances left, and it was a very harsh world, but it was like my hometown. It is also a place that I have a lot of affection for. Then if I protected your world, shouldn't you also be responsible for my world? That thing, if I have to exist in this world as a variable, wouldn't it be polite to at least prevent my original world from collapsing? I knew very well the sacrificial spirit that tried to leave me in this world, even at the cost of destroying my soul. But such sacrifices do me no good. However, there is only one thing I would like to talk about. I will take responsibility for your world, so you too must take responsibility for the world I left behind. Don't try to run away from something like death, but take responsibility. Are you telling me to go over to that world? On your behalf? If you called me here, it wouldn't be impossible for you to go there. I've never tried it before, then you should at least try. Sylvania, perhaps not expecting my reaction at all, opened her eyes wide and looked at me intently. However, there is nothing wrong with the logic. Since coming to this world, I have experienced a lot. Although it was a lot of hard work, there were quite a few rewarding and enjoyable things to do. Still, it doesn't mean I don't love the world I left behind. I definitely don't want the place to be caught up in strange happenings. Then Bellbroke, you have some faith in the world. The Taily I know somehow managed to overcome even against Bellbroke, who was completely unsealed. Moreover, there is no way I can lose against Bellbrock, who has more companions than before, and whose seal has not yet been broken. The stage has already been set. I went through all kinds of hardships while running, but it doesn't matter as long as the result was good. Don't waste your aspect magic, just save my world, because I will save your world. Isn't it a simple transaction? There is no room to think further. I have no intention of letting go of my remaining affection for the things I left behind. Sylvania looks at me quietly and then smiles. He closed his eyes and continued to laugh for a while before slowly continuing his story. Yeah, you're right. Sylvania nodded and raised the magic power of her entire body. Dark red magical energy fills the huge space. The bright white space suddenly became filled with heavy aspect magic, giving the appearance of a huge underground space. A greater amount of magical energy covers the infinite space than when using the highest level magic. The amount of magical power is enough to make you dizzy just by looking at it. The magical power that goes beyond the providence of the world and reaches the world beyond the stars is such a distant amount. This is a magic that has already been implemented hundreds of times. To call out Ed Rosteller. This time, it is not a spell to summon someone, but to leave the world on one's own. Eventually, from a gap in the enormous magic power, something like a huge iron gate rises. Actually, I don't know. It's as if you came to this world a long time after I called you out. Everything is unstable. You may have to swim for a while between the flow of time and the flow of space. It could go further into the future than expected, or it could go further back into the past. Still, it might be a lot better than killing yourself here. That's right. And like you said, I have to take as much responsibility as you have. Sylvania looked back with a faint smile, and he moved his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he couldn't hear clearly due to the aftereffects of the swirling magic power. Anyway, it seemed like he was leaving a thank you note, so I waved my hand and told him it was okay. In fact, all I did was make a fuss to survive at every moment. There was no particularly grandiose and noble goal, such as saving the world. We survived in our respective positions. If you confirmed that fact, that was enough. Sylvania's aspect magic space curtain is disappearing. I quietly closed my eyes as I watched Sylvania moving through the slowly opening door. There was no need to say goodbye. If you're alive, there will be another chance to meet you. No matter how long the night is, the morning sun always rises. Even on that night in the rainy forest with a gun pointed at my head, after enduring the long darkness, dawn began to dawn. That fact remains the same on Aiken Island, where the monster tribe and Velbroke ran rampant. The morning sun rises against the background of the Bellbroke subjugation team and Taily flying into the sky, cutting down space. The group of monsters that cover the sky try to move towards the continent and commit massacre, but they are blocked and suppressed by the Imperial army that soon arrives. The Imperial army, led by the Princess of Persica, was stationed widely along the coast to prevent the casualties from spreading to the continent, constantly blocking the hordes of monsters. Princess Phenia, who guards Taily and commands the forces, Ziggs, who clears the way for Taily to reach Velbroke's heart, and Clevius, who uses all his strength to repel Velbroke's attacks, are all affected by the aftereffects of Velbroke's magic. Elvira, who takes out a reagent to minimize the damage caused, Lortel, who is thinking about a method to approach Bellbroke more rationally, and Taily and Isla, who do not lose courage and ignite their fighting spirit at the center of it all. Everyone struggles to survive. I remember sitting in the woods on a battlefield on a rainy day, leaning against a tree stump and putting down the muzzle of my gun. I remember quietly looking at the flock of squirrels running around in front of me, the ants crawling in the dirt, and the sparrows sitting on the top of the conifer tree. No matter what happens, everyone lives anyway. I was confident that that fact would stick in my heart and not go away until the day I died. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the rubble of a building. Yenica and Lucy, both completely injured, were lying next to him. Both of them probably weren't in normal physical condition, but the way they were hugging each other tightly and wrapping their arms around each other looked like kittens, so I almost burst out laughing. Both were unconscious. He stayed by my side until just before I lost consciousness. The sky was high and clear. Has the day become bright before we know it? Morning sunlight is pouring down on the remains of the collapsed building. There was no sign of Bellbroke covering the sky. I ended up trying to get up from between the half-ruined academic buildings, because the pain was about to come again. Did you have a good dream? It was Lortel who was looking at me, who was lying down with Jenica and Lucy, and then finally spoke up. Lortel, who was sitting quietly on the remains of the building next to him, was covered in blood all over his body, just like us. It was a sign of a fierce battle. However, Lortel was just smiling openly as if everything was over. The stage has come to an end. Lortel does not elaborate on the long, life-threatening battle that took place last night. However, I am talking about seeing all the people gathered in the square resting on the ruins. Members of the punitive force and survivors were gathered together, panting as they waited for the rescue team. They were all people full of wounds. There were no fearsome holy spear dragons that covered the sky, nor were there any monsters running rampant as if they were going to destroy the world. Only the warm breeze blows through my hair. Lortel, who came off the stage, was quietly smiling while carrying his tired body. As I looked at us lying in the rubble, I closed my eyes. Then we talk. Thank you for your hard work. That one short word felt like it was stabbing my heart for no reason, so I lay still looking up at the sky. Suddenly, while reading a book, I looked out the window. It was a wide and blue morning sky as always. Drop, drip, the girl opens her eyes to the sound of water dripping from the sink. A dark room, unmade blanket, clothes lying around. A computer screen with lights on. The sound of a passing train occasionally heard outside the window. The sound of cicadas crying, wow wow. A slight breeze coming through the open window blows through the notes spread out on the sitting desk. The girl opens her eyes and stands up quickly. I look around with a confused face. There are cutlery-like things scattered on the floor. I was pessimistic about something and tried to end my life like this. Just like Ed Rothdiller, who tried to hang himself that day. As I look around, I see a small mirror standing on a sitting desk. A small girl with black hair and glasses can clearly be seen looking confused. The girl presses her throbbing head and flips through the open notebook. There are a lot of pictures drawn, illustrations filled with many wonderful characters. It was probably drawn by the girl herself. Some of them are drawn with sincerity, giving a realistic feeling of game concept art. Is this a girl's dream or goal? The shelves are full of books related to all kinds of concept art. In addition, there are a lot of books related to things like scenario writing and game programming. It is a world where there is no such thing as magic. Even if you try to gather magical power, nothing happens. The fragmentary memories left in my head make me feel more dizzy. Anyway, it seems like this girl dreamed of something, got frustrated, and tried to end her life. That was as much as I could know at this point. It is a world full of unknowns. Nevertheless, the girl stood up from her seat. I stared blankly at the monitor screen while listening to the sound of the computer cooler spinning. I stare at it for a while as if I am having a snowball fight, but I still can't figure out what it is. First of all, I am very hungry. I don't know why, but I guess I starved for a few days. First of all, if you don't want to starve to death, you should probably eat something. The girl somehow gets up and goes out to the kitchen. The wobbly gait is precarious. The screen of the computer the girl left behind turns on for a moment and then goes black. The last username set by the girl just before going dark appears for a moment and then disappears. Pepero Pepe was the name of the chocolate snack that the girl often bought. The computer screen went completely black, and only the sound of the girl opening the refrigerator door with difficulty came into the room. First of all, you had to eat something to survive. And as long as we live, life goes on, as it always has. Chapter 248 Epilogue 1. The man sits quietly on a tree stump and looks up at the blue sky. Dressed neatly in a shirt, silk vest, linen pants, a bluish coat, and a thin wizard's robe. It was a stuffy outfit, but I had no choice but to stay neat. Still, since I couldn't see anything else now, I sat with a somewhat relaxed attitude. Light up the tobacco. It was a bad habit I learned while hanging out with a senior professor, but there is nothing like it to organize my thoughts. Then I absent-mindedly listen to the birds chirping, look at the sky, and think. Past, present, future, and cliff point. All kinds of thoughts were fluctuating, but I decided on one thing that needed to be done. The man survived, and there are questions that inevitably follow those who survive. It was a question about how to live. It has been 2 years since Traciana Bloomriver came to Sylvania Academy. Even after I graduate, I end up coming here again after paying the driver, packing up my luggage, and getting off. Aiken Island across the sea came into view. The Max's bridge collapsed due to a disaster that occurred 2 years ago, but the newly constructed Bloom River Bridge has since taken its place. It is a much more spacious and clean bridge than the older Max's bridge. Since it was a bridge built with support from the Bloom River family, its name was Bloom River Bridge. Following Traciana, an elderly woman got out of the carriage. Senior Bloomriver, head of the Bloomriver family. After getting off the carriage while being attended to by servants, she looked at the bridge leading to Sylvania Academy and spoke. The construction itself seems to have gone quite well. It's been a while since it was completed, but I've been so busy that I'm only now checking it out. Mother, no, the head of the family was busy with work at home. It doesn't matter that I can't come and check it in person. Still, I wanted to see it with my own eyes, since it was a business that invested so much of the family's money. Well, I guess I'll see you more often now. Senior put on a leather coat and tidied up his clothes. She was the newly appointed alchemy professor at Sylvania Academy. Sylvania Academy lost more than half of its teaching staff due to the disaster the year before last. So, in order to create as many new faculty members as possible, all kinds of people were brought in. Among them, those who were interested in teaching responded to the call, but most refused. As Sylvania Academy suffered a great deal of damage, it felt like an unstable position as it was unclear how the situation would unfold in the future. However, because of the name value that had been accumulated over the years, new positions were filled by presidents of various academic societies, a retired knight leader of a famous magic tower knight order, a mercenary captain, and an authority on alchemy. Senior Bloomriver also had a lot of work to do as the head of the Bloomriver family, but he was confident that his daughters were taking over and handling the family's affairs well, so he decided to take up teaching. Those who survived the disaster, where Siang Changryang Velbroke went on a rampage, seemed to have gone through all the hardships to somehow run the academy. And now, 2 years and several months later, the damage can be said to have been restored to some extent. Among the new faculty members, Senior was almost the last one to join. In a way, he is the first faculty member to teach after the restoration of the academy was completed. More than 70 of the buildings that had been destroyed were rebuilt with support from the imperial family and the upper church. Thanks to the buildings shining as if they were brand new, it seems like a new heyday has arrived. But the scars also remained. There is a large monument erected near the end of the Bloom River Bridge. It was a monument with the names of victims from the disaster the year before last. The monument erected to commemorate and not forget them appears to be well over several meters in size. Traciana sighed heavily as she looked at the names filled with the large tombstone. Those are very heavy names, considering you were there at the time. Traciana was a student at Sylvania when the disaster occurred 2 years ago. Since I was about to graduate and was the top student in my grade, I ran around trying to help my juniors as much as possible. I tried my best to save a lot of lives, but I also lost a lot of lives. Traciana looked up at the tombstone for a moment and then shook her head calmly. Oh my, oh my. I didn't hear that Senior Professor Senior was taking office today. Sorry, you've come a long way. Currently, there is a shortage of academic personnel and the schedule is full. No, he's someone who shouldn't be treated like this. I apologize. A person of Senior's rank has been appointed as a professor, but there is no one to greet him. Normally, this might have been a situation where he would have shouted, but after seeing the situation in the newly built Trix building, Senior kept his mouth shut. There was no one who didn't look busy. It was only natural that this huge school was run with only a little more than half of the manpower it had in its heyday. Claire, who had been promoted to full professor sooner than expected, was crossing the Trix building with wide eyes, holding a bunch of documents in her arms. It was Professor Claire's job to guide Professor Senior, as he was also responsible for personnel affairs. You look very distracted. I also need to be put into practical work quickly. Senior responded politely. Seeing that seemingly dignified appearance, Professor Claire suddenly burst into tears. Senior Professor Senior, you are a person of common sense, yes. Did I do something? No. When you respond to a polite apology with polite encouragement, I feel like crying. What kind of treatment does this person receive despite holding the title of full professor? Senior felt that asking for details would only open the wound, so he kept his mouth shut for now. Then that one RIC, Traciana student, it's really become more reliable. Compared to when I was a student, I was so grown up that I almost didn't recognize me. It's only been 2 years, but people really change quickly. Assistant Professor Claire, no, Professor. How have you been? I'm doing well. I can't even say empty words. Normally, during this transition period, there is a lot of work to do. Still, it's worth doing because it's all roughly organized. Thank you for your concern, Traciana. Oh, look at my mind. I'm not a student anymore. Claire placed a large pile of documents on her work desk and corrected her words. Assistant Professor Traciana. While Senior went to check on his private laboratory, Traciana followed Professor Claire to receive work instructions. Professor Claire arrived at the private laboratory, giving various instructions on the way. As soon as she entered, she opened the window and ventilated the room. Traciana clicked her tongue as she looked at the number of documents, saying she should have done more than when she was an assistant professor, but not less. He looks like a no-nonsense child and laments every day. Professor Claire tends to have that image, but in reality, she was carrying out the work of several people on her own. A lot of my assistant professor skills have disappeared, so I am good at most things now. Even though Anis, the chief assistant, has not graduated anymore, it felt like the speed of work was getting done faster. You haven't been told who your advisor is yet, right? Assistant Professor Traciana. Yes, I guess you're a Professor Claire. I'm no longer in a position to take responsibility for anyone. Ah, yes, Traciana made a sad face as she looked at Professor Claire, whose eyes were filled with tears. Professor Claire took out a specific document among the documents and shook it off to check the contents. It seemed to be a list of advisors who would be in charge of assistant professors. Professor Claire looked at the list for a while and then laughed as if she was embarrassed. Ahaha, Assistant Professor Traciana must be having a bit of a hard time. Yes. Is my advisor a strict person? No. Rather than that, Professor, Claire turned the document around and showed it to Traciana. The name of the professor next to Assistant Professor Traciana looked familiar. Ed Rosteller, ha. You know the name, right? Obviously, I was in my 3rd year when I graduated. Why is your name listed as my advisor? Professor Claire was worried about where to start to explain, but she thought it would be easier to talk about the conclusion first, so she opened her mouth. I was appointed as a special professor early this year. A letter of recommendation from Princess Phenia, who was nominated as the next emperor, and a letter from St. Claris came in at the same time. As soon as I graduate, I receive the title of full professor. And now, as soon as I accumulate a few years of experience, I plan to be appointed as a senior professor. If you look at the speed, it looks like you will be the head of the department in just a few years. A senior professor at that age. This is an unprecedented greeting. The achievements made at the time of the disaster were remarkable, and in the fields of elemental arts and magic engineering, the professors achieved such accomplishments that they could not say anything. In addition, he is virtually unrivaled in the field of astral science. He is a professor who can cover the fields of elemental science and magic engineering at the same time, and is also a person who can even dabble in astral science. In addition, he was born with a noble background and had the charisma to lead students. He was a talent that a bachelor's degree that was already struggling due to a lack of manpower did not want to miss. As proof, the bachelor caught Ed Rossdaler by giving him unprecedented treatment that has never been seen before and will never be done in the future. In addition to what was publicly known, there were also rumors that there were other conditions that were passed on to the Rossdaler family behind the scenes at the bachelor's level. Although it was just a rumor, there was a lot of talk that much of the real power of Sylvania Academy was transferred to Ross Taylor, senior professor in his early 20s. When Traciana thought about her position as an assistant professor, she realized the difference. I understand that even Professor Glast, who was promoted quickly and was the fastest to become a senior professor, was in his late 30s at the time. Even at that time, he was famous for his unconventional greetings. As someone who was a junior has become my advisor, Assistant Professor Traciana must be a bit embarrassed. No, I don't really care about that. Because he was the son of a duke to begin with, it was more uncomfortable to treat him poorly. However, I don't have a good sense of how the work will be done. Actually, that's what really worries me. Professor Ed Rossdaler is a very unpredictable person. Yes, he rose to prominence at an unbelievable rate and quickly became equal to Professor Clare. In fact, it was obvious that as time passed, Ed Rossdaler would rise higher. Equal status may only be temporary. The achievements he had made and the honors that came with them were already famous throughout the empire. Among the freshman candidates, many were excited about the fact that they would be able to see Professor Ed Rothdeller in person when they came to Sylvania. This is a fact that Traciana, who has no interest in teaching, did not know. He handles all the basic tasks neatly, but because he has so much work to do, it's hard to visit him often. He usually doesn't come out of the private laboratory we set up in the northern forest, but it's even harder to find him during vacation periods. Is it so? He even goes out of school a lot. I don't see you much these days, considering that you said before that you were going to visit Ross Taylor's parents' house during vacation. He might be at his parents' house now, no. I'm just telling you where you're going. Are you saying you just walk around like that without doing anything? But since you still do everything you need to do, I can't say anything. Working with great people or extraordinary people is inherently difficult because everyone thinks they are as capable as they are. He clearly seemed like a person who was sure about getting things done. In fact, he was that kind of person even when he was a student. Traciana rested her chin and thought for a moment. I thought maybe I had the wrong advisor, that's what I thought. I already have 3 documents to hand over, so Assistant Professor Traciana, please hand them over to me. If you're not at the Northern Forest Lab, I'm not sure where you are. But yes, documents. This is the first task I've received since taking office. Find Ed Rossdaler and deliver the documents. Besides, we also have to prepare for the graduation ceremony for fourth-year students. Since this is the job handled by the youngest professor, it should be seen as Assistant Professor Tracy or Assistant Professor. In addition, preparing for the graduation ceremony of current fourth-year students. I can do this level of work. Is it so? That's great. Assistant Professor Traciana. Professor Claire felt faint for a moment while looking at Traciana. This is because it reminded me of the time when I was just appointed as the youngest professor and was overwhelmed with work. Now that I am in a position where I am responsible for all the work, the passage of time is meaningless. However, this did not mean that his workload decreased. Traciana looked through the documents she had received. This document. This is the work that Professor Ed Rostaler will handle during vacation. In fact, you don't have to do them all, you just have to choose one of the three. Is that so? Yes. Although they are all important tasks, it is difficult to complete them all during the remaining vacation period. Still, I hope you can definitely complete at least one of the three, preferably before the vacation ends. Come to think of it, there isn't much time left until the vacation period. Looking at the academic schedule, school starts right after the new student selection exam is completed and the graduates are sent out. I know you're busy taking care of the new student selection test, but I hope you'll still make time to do it. I see Traciana open the first document. Pulan. Oh, that's it. Do you know Pulan, the land of pastoralism? The dairy farm area is spread out widely. Yes, I recently received a call from the undergraduate research team. The record about Turkalax, the highest-ranking wind spirit who was famous in the past, was cut off there. If it's Teocalax, it's a giant bear-shaped spirit the size of a mountain ridge, right? Yes, that's right. In fact, academic research is a task of low importance. But if academic work is not handled on time, the imperial family will inspect it. We must continue to do the bare minimum of research. Professor Clare continued speaking while signing various documents. Recently, literature about Turkalax records was discovered in the Pulan region. This is a great discovery in the field of elemental science. Currently, among the professors of elemental studies, the only one who could use his help is Professor Ed. So I'm asking at the academic level if he can go to the Pulan region and look into it if there's any spare work left. Is that so? Well, it's not particularly dangerous, but just in case, someone with the minimum combat skills should go. Traciana nodded and then took out the other documents that followed. This time, the documents were more realistic and practical. Is this the commercial city of Old Deck? Yes. That too is probably a business trip request. It's not academic research, but practical work related to logistics distribution. It is time to renew distribution negotiations with Elt Trading Company, which is currently in charge of academic logistics. Why is Professor Ed handling this? Professor Ed has extensive connections at the top. In addition, I often hear rumors that the situation at Old Deck is unusual these days. I think the Academy hopes that a trustworthy person will appear if possible. Are you saying it's not that unusual? Claire was signing a document with a quill pen and tilted her head as if thinking for a moment. Do you know who the current owner of Elt Trading Company is? That old merchant called Slag Keldlux. Wasn't it Lortle? The Lortle student's official title was assistant manager. Lortle needed a face to sit at the table while he was attending Sylvania. To manage the Elt Trading Company head office in Old Deck, an assistant manager position is not enough. He joined Lortle in overthrowing the Golden King Elt and held the position of leader until Lortle returned to Sangdo. But there is a rumor that Lortle has been making various evasive plans to avoid giving up his position even after graduating. Perhaps he harbors ambitions to reorganize the balance of power in Oldek. Stories of such shady merchants, I am not familiar with them, me too. What is certain is that the situation at Old Deck is unusual, so it would be better for Professor Ed, who has extensive local contacts, to go in person. It was definitely an understandable decision. It would be okay to assign another person in charge, but from the perspective of leading the academic department, it would be better to have someone who can clearly handle the work. Then the last document is it's a request for a business trip to the Raymond Mountains. Why do you have so many places to go on business trips? People who are inherently capable tend to be asked a lot of things. That's Scout's job. Traciana swallowed dry saliva and skimmed through the documents. You know the wizard named Zelen the Cutter? He is a wizard who participated in the demi-human war with Professor Glast and Professor Collide recently. It is said that he has been appearing in the Raymond Mountains following the traces of the Archmage Glocked. They are looking at the traces of his life or something. Are you thinking of recruiting this person for a professorship? He is a man of outstanding ability. However, there have been rumors recently that he is very interested in research on aspect magic, so I thought the most likely option would be to ask Professor Ed, the best expert on aspect magic in the academy, for some persuasion. The bachelor's department is experiencing a manpower shortage right now, so Yael definitely want to bring them in. Okay. But should you come and persuade me, well, I don't know. In fact, it would be most certain that Principal Obel, who is currently lying in a hospital bed, would go in person. But he is unable to move due to his mobility problems, Professor Clare continued in a regretful voice. Another student, Lucy, who is proficient in aspect magic, left school and stayed at the Ross Taylor mansion while she recovered her magic, so, in the end, Professor Ed is the right person. Seeker glassed outlaw collide cutter Zelen. Zelen is one of the three wizards who lived during the war era with Obel and is said to have achieved the most remarkable achievements. He is also the party who entrusted the demi-human children to Abbot Austin's cleric monastery. Obviously, it's too tight to handle all three at once. They are all important, but so, when you find Professor Ed, be sure to pick one and tell him to deal with it. Yes, I understand, but how do I actually find Professor Ed? When Traciana asked that question, Professor Clare smiled and answered, "It would be quickest to visit the private laboratory in the northern forest. If you're not there, check out all the other facilities on campus. If you're not on Aiken Island, it's also vacation time." The smile that Professor Clare put on with difficulty was somehow ominous. She quickly took out a piece of paper stuck between the documents and spread it out on the desk. It was a map that showed the entire empire at a glance. At that point, Traciana felt an ominous sensation. Oh, by any chance start from here? Professor Clare picked the center rim of the empire, the northern end of the Rossdaler estate managed by matriarch Tanya Rossdaler, so far, and all the way to the barony of Failover, which is attached to the southern end. If you stop by, you'll probably find one here somewhere. Traciana's face turned pale. If Professor Clare couldn't find him on Aiken Island in the first place, there's no way Traciana could have come up with a clever solution. As soon as I took office, my first mission was to ride a carriage to the center of the continent for a few days. I wondered what was going on, but I had no choice. It was the youngest professor's fate. Chapter 249, Epilogue 2. Whoa. Traciana's face had already turned blue when she got off the carriage. After riding a carriage for a while, I arrived at Sylvania Academy, and the task I received upon taking office was to go to the Ross Taylor estate and find Professor Ed. I wondered if all these unreasonable things were happening, but it was something that could not be helped. Traciana took a wooden bag full of documents and got off in front of the Ross Taylor mansion. I had been riding a carriage for several days, so I felt dizzy at any moment. Still, I am glad I arrived. I heard that a lot of it was destroyed during the Mebular Advent, but there are no signs of that anymore here either. The Ross Taylor mansion was much larger than when Crepin managed it. Actually, it was worth it. There were difficult times, but in the end, the duchy was successfully revived by the next head of the family, Tanya Rossdaler, and her brother, Ed Rossdaler. Not only is it receiving a lot of protection from powerful forces within the empire, but it has also succeeded in maintaining its original authority and has many strong people in its ranks. Thinking about it that way, it seemed natural that the Ross Taylor family would continue its heyday. I was contacted in advance, but what happened to the daughter of the Bloomriver family all of a sudden? As I went inside with the guidance of my retainers, a familiar face came out to greet me. It is usually the role of the head butler or the head maid to come out and greet guests politely using the name of the maid. Why is Mr. Bell here? It's been a while, Miss Traciana. You've become so mature and dependable that you can't compare to when you were at Arfleys Hall, so I almost didn't recognize you. You were scouted by the Ross Taylor family, Mr. Bell. Yes. No, it's not that big of a deal. But as soon as she arrived at Ross Taylor's mansion, Traciana was happy to meet someone with a spherical face. But she didn't expect Bell to come out. Bell Meyer is the head maid who manages the top-class dormitory, Arfleys Hall. He was not the type of person who was easily scouted because he had a lot of pride in his work and was not concerned about money. In fact, there were rumors that the Elt Company tried to get her out several times, but failed several times. There was a strong feeling that her residence was decided by herself. Actually, I received a lot of offers similar to scouting. I was refusing every time. Even if you are not from the Rossdaler family. But why are you doing such an unreasonable thing here, Chief Butler? Well, actually, it's a bit hard to say it myself, but I tend to have a sense of responsibility. I believe that if it is something I am responsible for and must accomplish, I must take responsibility until the end. So there is something I feel I need to take responsibility for, so for now, I will leave the work related to the Arfleys Hall to my successor and come out here. Maid Jean Bellmeyer is a servant, but she is capable enough to be treated as an executive within Sylvania. Once placed at the top, they take care of personnel management, financial management, mansion management, housekeeping, reception of VIPs, and even minor government affairs, and they also have a fairly high level of combat ability. As there were no such talented people as advisors, he was a person who was difficult to recruit from various noble or influential families. However, the more people like that, the more carefully they choose who to serve. Currently, I am serving Tanya Rossdaler and Ed Rossdaler as the owners, so I am only in charge of the academic side as an advisor. Is it so? I won't pry into what it means to be responsible. First of all, I am having a hard time riding the carriage for too long. Can we go inside to rest and talk about business? Of course. I will guide you personally. Traciana handed over a bag full of documents to the employees and wiped away her sweat. For the past few days, I have been moving around again and again. I was already exhausted. So Traciana followed Bellmeyer into the mansion without saying a word. Once you arrive at the Duke's residence, it is polite to meet the head of the household in charge of the place and say hello. Consisting of a majestic main building, two rather small annexes, and a large spire standing in the center, the Duke of Rostello's residence was much larger than in its heyday. If you let your guard down, you could get lost. Not only is it the largest ducal family on the continent, but it has recently gained sky-high authority, making it a prestigious family second only to the Clole royal family. The scale of the mansion, which is almost palace-like, is understandable. Since you have come to the mansion as a VIP, please say hello to Master Tanya first. The owner of this mansion, Duchess Tanya Rossdaler, is a student at Sylvania Academy and the student council president. During the school year, he comes to the academy to entrust the management of the mansion and basic family affairs to his major retainers. But during vacation periods like now, he stays in the Duke's residence and handles family affairs. It was such a huge schedule that it felt like I had two bodies. But when I saw that she was actually accomplishing it, I thought Tanya herself was an incredibly talented person. Currently, there are several distinguished guests inside Duke Ross Taylor's residence. There will be people who are familiar with Miss Tracy and others, so you won't be too embarrassed if you run into them. Distinguished guests. What's going on? No, there are always VIPs coming and going at the Duke's residence. It is a place where the most powerful people in the entire empire pop out whenever the opportunity arises. So I recommend that you always be careful about how you behave. A place where you meet VIPs who are hard to find even in the imperial family while passing by. From the maid's perspective, it was a working environment that was almost hellish. It is a place where everything had to be perfect at all times, and even small mistakes were not tolerated. Bellmeyer, who wore the title of maid in such a place, was not an ordinary person, but even Traciana knew that she was an extraordinary person. Of course, Miss Traciana, the daughter of the Bloomriver family, is a very honored guest. I didn't forget to add that in case it felt like I was belittling the other person. Bellmeyer was a person with a knack for managing even the smallest detail. Thank you for saying that, but actually, I did not come today as the daughter of the Bloomriver family. Is that so? Yes. Today, I came to see Professor Ed as an assistant professor at Sylvania Academy. I have something to tell you about work. Tracy Honor became an assistant professor. At first, Bellmeyer did not show any signs of surprise. This is because if you do it wrong, it can be rude. I just calmly accepted it as is and lowered my head with my eyes closed. I'm sorry, but even we maids cannot accurately judge Master Ed's fate. Yes, is it so? Yes. He is a very mysterious person, so if he suddenly appears at the mansion, he will return to Aiken Island at some point. I searched every corner of Aiken Island, but I couldn't find it. That's why I came here. Is that so? My master tends to take care of everything in advance that he thinks might be necessary, but you made him take the step himself. I would like to apologize on behalf of the owner. First of all, Traciana waved her hand as if embarrassed, saying that it was okay to Bellmeyer, who politely greeted her. The way she handles her work without leaving even the slightest grudge against her master is typical of a top-class maid. However, since he has always had a strong image of being the leader in charge of the Arfleys Hall, it is refreshing to see him pick on someone and call him master and follow him. because I never thought that Belle Meyer would entrust herself to someone. To be precise, there weren't many people who had the courage to take on and handle such a talented person. Competent staff sometimes even prey on their own masters. A person with a small capacity cannot embrace someone with a larger capacity than himself. Still, I don't think he's on Aiken Island, so it would be right to look for Duke Rossdaler first. It doesn't seem easy because it looks bigger than I thought, but we will notify users. Then, let's head towards the main building where Master Tanya's reception room is. That was then. The Spire Square is surrounded between the main building and the annex. The two people who were standing with their names on each other looked towards the main building and quickly turned their heads. At that moment, the large door of Ross Taylor's main building opened, and a distinguished guest came out from inside, escorted by employees. The person who walked out among the retainers, wearing a red dress and braiding light pink hair, was someone Traciana had heard of. Belle Meyer bowed her head, and the people around her also bowed their heads in unison. Among the vassals who protect Duke Rossdaler, there is a spiritist whose strength is different from the others. Baroness Yenica Palova. She was a girl who managed the Croton Mountains at the southern end of Ross Taylor's territory and was revered as an angel by the residents of the area. In fact, she was one of the best forces protecting this Ross Taylor territory. Compared to when he was a student at Sylvania, his youthful appearance had disappeared, but he still looked childish and lively. Since he was born as a commoner, he is very popular among the residents of the territory, and because of that, there are no bad rumors going around among the Vips. A heavenly girl who smiles brightly at everything in the world. That was Traciana's assessment when she first saw the Yenica failover, but it doesn't seem like that has changed even after several years. It was so consistent that I felt reassured. Oh, Senior Traciana, I don't know if she is conscious of the fact that she is a baroness whom the people of the territory look up to. She pulled up the hem of her dress and ran down the stairs at a quick pace. The employees who followed behind quickly caught up with puzzled faces. It's been a while. What happened to Ross Taylor's mansion? The fact that Yenica Palova still remembered Traciana's face was surprisingly touching. Even though he was a senior from the Ministry of Magic, there wasn't that much interaction. First of all, Tracy, who was a senior in school and is now the daughter of a self-author, did not lower her head. Yenica, it's been a while. I heard that he was given the title of Baron, but I had no idea he was being treated so kindly. What? Well, he is in a position where he is treated particularly, especially within the Ross Taylor territory. In fact, he is at the forefront of protecting the territory and is protected by both Tanya and Ed. Although his title was a Baron, he was treated almost like a duke under the protection of the two men. In addition, because she was receiving a lot of love from young Jimin, Jenica was so shy that she would often hang her head wherever she went. If he even chants his name, he quickly closes the curtains of the carriage and hides inside, and stamps his feet because he doesn't know what to do with the employees' hospitable treatment sometimes. He rolls up his sleeves and tries to do the laundry or dishes, so the employees don't know what to do. It is said that there are many cases where people get startled and run away. It's easy to get used to it in 2 years, but due to Jenica's nature, she can never take off her commoner identity. In fact, Traciana felt reassured because she thought that part of her was like Yenica. It might be rude to Yenica herself. Are you on your way after meeting with Master Tanya? When Belle asked that question, Yenica shook her head thoughtfully. Tanya is not there. As soon as she heard that story, Belle Meyer held back a sigh. With Traciana by my side, I will protect my master's authority for now. But Traciana had already noticed. Tanya is not a perfect superhuman like rumors say. I already vaguely knew about it when I was an undergraduate student. A tea table was set up in one corner of the neatly maintained Ross Taylor mansion. Yenica sat on one side and tapped the beak of the sparrow-shaped wind spirit sitting on her shoulder, then raised her finger above her head and sent it flying away. She is a girl who is strangely loved by spirits, both past and present. Actually, ever since I joined the Ross Taylor family as a vassal, I always meet new people. It was great to meet an alumnus after such a long time. Yenica said this to Traceana with a grin on her face. Okay, of course, it's full of people who are too nice to me, but even if the dessert trays are full of refreshments, they are high-end products. I only came to look for Ed for a moment, but I never thought he would treat me so kindly. At first glance, it looked like top bakers were working in the kitchen. Traciana had eyes that could accurately see the quality of refreshments. Anyway, you are really treated well. It feels like all the employees are watching you. Yes, I am worried too. Actually, there's no need to be so polite to him, even if he made a minor mistake. He apologized like he was going to die. It's already been quite a while since I've been given the title of Baron, but I still can't get used to it. What kind of treatment will they be receiving at the private residence in the barony of Failover? If you go there, Yenneker is the owner of the mansion. At this point, I was starting to get worried about Yenneker. I think like that sometimes. Was I even suited for a position like this? I wonder if I am being praised too much just for doing what I am supposed to do well. Don't worry about that, Yenneker. It's not just empty words. It suits you really well. You seem like a much more distinguished guest than me. Is that so? Yes. I was surprised when I came out of the main residence earlier. I really thought you were a duchess or something. At those words, Yenneker suddenly blushed and spoke. The late duchess. What if you say something like that so carelessly? Then Yenneker looked around for a moment, then subtly lowered her head and spoke softly. Really? What is that reaction? Weren't you and Ed dating in school to begin with? It wasn't like that. Should I say it was a similar relationship, or not, since Ed was so busy? It might have been a bit too forward to impose such relationship rules. I thought about that. Something like that. Even if I didn't even hear it as Yenneker spoke with a deep blush, Traciana understood the situation in an instant. In the first place, this girl is as nice as she can be, and if she falls in love with her, she is the type of person who will take out everything, including her liver and gallbladder. Ed is not that kind of person, but she would be perfect to be the heroine of a tragedy where she is cruelly thrown away after having fun as she pleases if she does something wrong. Traciana opened her half-moon eyes, took a sip of tea, and spoke. If that's the case, let's start dating. Even if you say that. A man who has come this far and doesn't have proper relationship rules is trash. Just don't criticize Ed, I'm sorry. In fact, it may be because the other man has too big a bowl. Speaking of the owner of the Duke of Rosteller, he is a person who is difficult to treat as an equal, no matter how much he holds the title of Baron. In fact, I don't think there will be an issue of authority between Ed and Yenneker, but if it goes beyond a man-woman relationship and becomes a marital relationship, it's a different story. I am starting to feel a sense of crisis. Now that they have become successful enough, there will be a lot of people who are eagerly targeting Professor Ed at that time. Are you going to be more proactive and then hit the ground and regret it? When you talk so directly, it's hard to say anything. Yenneker lowered her head and spoke with difficulty. Of course, there are a lot of different women coming and going at Duke Ross Taylor's house. I also felt an unreasonable sense of crisis, really. That's definitely a huge improvement. But they are all people who claimed to be mine last week. Didn't St. Clarice come by with the feeling that she just wanted to see her face? And didn't Lortle, the owner-agent of Elt Company, suddenly show up? Everyone said their names together. They are so big that just looking at them makes you break out in a cold sweat. A moment of silence was held for the employees working at the Ross Taylor residence. Every day will feel like walking on thin ice. I guess I should say that I am rather discouraged since Ed has become such a huge figure. I am wondering if he would hang out with someone like me, really. And this it's hard to know how to talk about it. Yenneker glances around again and lowers her voice before speaking. They say that when you become the owner of a duchy, you often take on multiple women by yourself. Yenneker, please don't look at me like that. Yes, I know Ed isn't that profligate. But if that happens, can I join in too? Sometimes I feel that way, sometimes I don't. But it's a bit weird to not do it. And it's really bad to think like that. It feels like my morals can't keep up in the first place. But if I don't think about that possibility in advance, Traciana was speechless as she watched Yenneker rambling. What good is there in taking action to become a concubine in the first place? It wasn't that I didn't know that Yenneker had low self-esteem compared to her outstanding abilities, but this wasn't the case. I shouldn't be so sure, but at least to Professor Ed, Yenneker, you are special enough. You can have more self-esteem. Thank you so much for saying that. Traciana lamented as she looked at Yenneker, whose mouth turned up for no reason. So you have to think about becoming a worthy companion. To be honest, if you lie down and look at me, Professor Ed would look at you right away. That's true. But then Ed will be in trouble. I don't want to trouble Ed under any circumstances. If possible, I want to be of help. I'm not unaware of his pure personality like a blank page. That's why Traciana almost lost her mind. For me, a snob, Yenica, who is such a heavenly girl, is not a good match. Yes, whatever you think, Yenica, you are free. I won't argue about that. However, it is nice to see her becoming jealous after losing Professor Ed to another woman that Yenica may also be worried about something, but is unable to hastily answer Traciana's words. It is said that all kinds of women come and go to Ed's mansion. Some may even be seriously trying to snatch Ed away. Even Traciana is aware of that. In fact, Yenica was also aware of the fact that Ed had a lot of female clothing. Most people did not build rapport as well as Yenica. However, that did not mean that I could feel at ease again. The person who gets on Jenica's nerves more than anyone else is probably Hello. When I heard a blank voice, I turned my head. The petite girl who appeared with the assistance of two maids was someone no one would have known if they had attended Sylvania Academy. Lucy Merrill, a rare genius wizard. Now there are rumors that he has quit Sylvania and taken up residence at the Ross Taylor mansion. It seems the rumor was true. Lucy. Ha, hi. She is the daughter of the Bloomriver family. You need to interact a little more in a special way. Opportunities like this are rare. Let's approach in a more friendly way. A maid standing behind Lucy carefully lowered her head and whispered in Lucy's ear. Lucy shook her head with an expression of annoyance in the world, sat down on one side of the tea table, and buried her head on the table. Her attire was a neat social dress, and her hair was shiny and neatly curled. I didn't notice it when she was rolling around on the grass in an ill-fitting school uniform and an old witch's hat. But when she dresses up, Lucy looks quite like a young lady and is pretty. You need to behave more gracefully. It's rude in front of the lady of Viscount. I was really worried about the maid who kept whispering behind me. If you want to interact with VIPs, you must behave in a dignified manner. Now, please straighten your back. Lucy straightened her back with an expression as if she were dying. Her face was almost bloodless. Triziana looked at the scene and eventually became speechless. Lucy was the same as before and now. Chapter 250 Epilogue. Complete. Lucy Merrill is a hero of the Empire. He was praised for his various achievements by the Clole royal family and received various commendations, gold and silver treasures, and various honorary positions. Despite this, Emperor Clole did not give her any title or fiefdom, even though she was given a baronetcy by even Jenica, who was far less powerful by force. As a wise gentleman, he realized that a title would only serve as a shackle for a talented person named Lucy Merrill. Since he doesn't have the capacity to take responsibility for the title, in the first place it's close to just throwing away a territory. In the end, Lucy just left Sylvania Academy without changing her status and entrusted herself to the Ross Taylor mansion. She decided that she would have nothing more to do on Aiken Island on her own. Lucy Merrill, who had used up several years' worth of magical power in the final battle, was in fact nothing more than an ordinary girl. She needed a force to officially protect her for at least a few years. Should I say it's the price, or is it because I am not particularly interested in wealth? After handing over the enormous amount of wealth and honor bestowed by the imperial family to Duke Ross Taylor, Lucy spent her days confining herself to a room in his mansion and recovering her magic day by day. The day she regains her magic, the Ross Taylor territory, protected by the two-headed carriages Yenica, and Lucy will become a truly impregnable sacred place. She was a much talked about person among the people of the territory, and in fact Lucy's magical power recovered faster than expected. However, what Lucy Merrill did not expect was Ed, who was looking for someone capable of controlling her scouted Belle Maya. Miss Lucy, you need to move your arms more gracefully when lifting the teacup. Miss Lucy, you shouldn't spill any crumbs. I'm sorry, Miss Lucy, but the hem of your dress is touching the garden floor. Miss Lucy, Miss Lucy. Lady Lucy, Lady Lucy, Lady Lucy, Lady Lucy, Lady Lucy. The two maids who follow Lucy around all day and assist her are from Offaly's Hall. Not only is he competent as Velmir's direct subordinate, but he is also fearless against Grousey. In the first place, Lucy has lost her magic, so she can't run away. Lucy sat at the tea table and spoke with her complexion turning pale. Please save me, Traciana rubbed her forehead regretfully. She knew what Belmire had said, that she was responsible for it. Her strong will to turn Lucy into a human being before she regains her strength was conveyed. She can truly be said to be a responsible person. Whatever it is, the reason I keep sticking to the Ross Taylor estate is probably because I like it here. In just a few years, she will return as a rare genius wizard, and all kinds of organizations and magic towers are drooling over her. Nevertheless, Lucy Merrill chose to remain at the Duke's residence with Ed Rothdeller. The reason is obvious. Everyone in her mansion already knew that she had an open crush on Ed Ross Taylor. Lucy Yenica put down her teacup and quietly looked at Lucy. Yenica's biggest worry was the existence of Lucy Merrill. Ed Rothdeller treated Yenica specially, but the same was true for Lucy Merrill. Whenever he had to return to the Duke's residence, he would always check on her condition and personally check to see if she was in any discomfort and if her life was okay. Lucy Merrill doesn't seem to like Ed's attention either, so she occasionally hugs him or sits on his lap. She flirted with Ed as if she was showing off, but no one could stop her. In fact, he is a VIP among VIPs who receive special treatment in the Duke's residence. Even Tanya, the owner of the Duke's mansion, does not treat Lucy carelessly. Traciana's impressions as she watched the scene were as follows. How on earth is the person called my advisor sitting in his mansion with several women around? It may have been an expression of his extraordinary will to take responsibility for everyone he owed money to. But in fact, if you look at its appearance, it appears to be nothing more than a main forestry setup. I don't think it's just Traciana who knows the situation, but just because she can see what's going on, there might be rumors going around among the greedy nobles that she's an incredible person. Well, it's a blessing to be self-employed. The future was clear to Traciana. Yenica hesitantly lifts the teacup and brings it to her mouth, and Lucy rests her chin on the table with a blank face, but is subtly aware of Yenica's gaze. The two men, as well as the women visiting the mansion, don't seem to have any intention of giving up on Ed Rothdeller easily. Probably not even Saint Clarice, Deputy Lortel, or Imperial Princess Selaha. I have no intention of giving up on Ed Rothdeller, as they are all considered the most powerful figures in the Empire. Compromise will not be easy. There are many people who want it, but Ed Rothdeller has only one body. Then the future to come is not difficult to picture. You're walking down a thorny path. As I said, embracing someone requires a large vessel. Traciana prayed that her advisor would have broad courage like Hattie. This is because the things that needed to be included were too vast. Sorry, it's too late. It was about 20 minutes later that Bell Meyer, who had gone to look for Tanya, arrived. However, he did not appear with Tanya. In the end, she couldn't find it. I learned this story later, but it is said that Tanya Rosteller has a habit of disappearing from time to time, even when she is busy working. Traciana had a blank expression on her face, but Bell Meyer approached her shaking her hands. As if it was nothing surprising, she then took a quick look around the tea table. Then, after resting his chin and thinking for a moment, he sat down with his knees bent and tried to lift the tablecloth. Then Tanya came out from underneath it. Traciana had been making a blank expression ever since she came to the mansion. Tanya, neatly dressed in a shirt and skirt along with an old-fashioned matriarch's cloak, came out from under the table, as if it were natural, and cleared her throat with a chuckle. Thank you for coming all the way here, Lady Traciana. I met him when he was at Sylvania as the student council president. As the owner of Duke Ross Taylor's residence, this is my first time meeting you in a welcoming manner. I since went below that. When do you think this will happen? Needless to say, it was from the beginning. Is it possible that there are any normal people in this Duke Ross Taylor residence? That thought came to me out of nowhere, but it was rude anyway. This is the continent's largest dungeon, and in fact, it is in front of Duchess Tanya Rothdeller, who controls the ducal residence. When I stood up for a moment and tried to bow my head, Tanya waved her arm, said it was okay, and sat down in the remaining seat at the tea table. Because I like being in dark places, I embarrassed you. There are times when I like that warm, strangely calming feeling. Give it a try when your head gets too busy or you feel tired. Is it worth recommending? The place I usually recommend is the closet, or something. It's good to place it under your work desk, and if possible, it's even better if you cover it with a blanket. That feeling of sticking and pressing master. When Bell Meyer called lightly, Tanya opened her half-moon eyes and looked at Bell for a moment. The meaning behind Bell's words was meaningless. Please pin it and maintain your dignity. Maybe it was because Tanya felt a bit relaxed in her shoulders because she was meeting an alumnus for the first time in a while. Tanya pulled on the cloak she was wearing, straightened her posture, and spoke. Well, Lady Traciana seems to be very interested in my brother's relationships with women. After hearing those words, Traciana was like, oops. Anyway, too much has been said about the Nam family's romantic history. In fact, it is not something that cannot be said in a friendly exchange with fellow student Yenica. But if Tanya, the owner of the mansion, was listening to all of those words, it would be a completely different story. Duchess Tanya Rothdale is one of the hearts of this empire, in fact, second only to the emperor. Although he doesn't have an authoritarian attitude and speaks openly, however, this should not make this side any easier. Traciana is already seeing through it. Although she seems childish and her behavior is light, the girl's perspective and psychology are anything but light. Just by glancing sideways, you can gauge a person's condition and calculate your interests in an instant while pretending not to care. 3 years as the student council president of Sylvania Academy and 2 years as the head of the Ross Taylor family. It's enough years to turn even a childish girl into a slut. Even light and comfortable actions are all within the scope of calculation. Traciana saw through that fact and bowed her head. Oh, and just hearing that somewhat relaxed word Traciana noticed, this girl even realized that Traciana had penetrated her inner self. Tracy Anna swallowed her dry saliva, feeling that it was somehow playing in her palm. There is no need to make you so uncomfortable. At least the person sitting at this tea table treats me comfortably without being tied to my status or authority. When I spoke with a smile, Yenica answered with a smile. That was possible because Tanya treated me comfortably in the first place. I've known you for a long time. Then please leave these maids behind, please. Despite Lucy's earnest request, Tanya pretended not to hear. The order to keep a maid attached to Lucy was given directly by Ed. Anyway, I think Lady Traciana has come to see my brother. Sadly, my brother passed away on Aiken Island the day before yesterday. It's not long until the new student selection exam that my brother is in charge of. Yes, yes, Professor Ed. Then, yes, I see you are mixed. If it's an urgent delivery, it might be better to go back quickly, right? Traciana slumped down in her seat. I came here after going through all that hardship, but it was mixed. He felt like God had abandoned him. Finally, he takes a deep breath and speaks. Yes, then I guess I should go back quickly. You must be busy, but thank you for your hospitality. No, I also have to go back to Sylvania when the semester is over, so I'll see you again. It's a professor-to-student relationship, so you don't have to speak up. Is that so? All right. Will I be able to stop talking at that time? That's what I thought, but I decided to accept it for now. And it seems like I've said too much unnecessary things about my family's personal history. Sorry. No. You don't need to worry about that. You may be curious, because you are a person who gets talked about a lot. And he is also a professor who is in charge of Lady Traciana, so of course you are curious about many things. Oh yes, thank you for your understanding. Traciana was grateful that Tanya said she was okay. Then I suddenly felt a sense of discomfort. However, the fact that my advisor is Professor Ed Howe. Come to think of it, I never even told Belle that fact. This is because revealing too much about the internal affairs of the university is not a very good thing. Oh, you seem to have forgotten I am also the student council president of Sylvania Academy, right? It was only after hearing that fact that Traciana realized it. There is no way for him to escape from the clutches of this duchess. He is a person who brought a half-ruined ducal family to this point in a short period of time. Although he was quite young, he clearly felt that his bowl was different. Only then do you see the picture. Tanya Rosdaler is the final decision-maker who decides everything in this Duchy of Rosdaler. There is no way she wouldn't know about Ed Rosdaler's actions or relationships. Ed's future seems to be slowly drawing into Traciana's head. In the eyes of this girl, who would do anything for the prosperity of the Ross Taylor family, her brother's shining interpersonal relationship would seem like a treasure of gold and silver, a rare spiritist, a historical genius wizard, princess of the empire, the saintess of Siang Wangdo, circumference at the top. This girl has no intention of giving up on anything. Ed Rosteller will be ready to do whatever it takes to get them all drunk. If Ed has a girl like this behind him, this is the future he will eventually reach. I'll have to become as close as possible while working as an advisor this time. Sadly, Traciana Bloomriver was also a snob among snobs. I have developed a habit of smoking tobacco. It was because he hung out with Senior Professor Callide too often after becoming a professor. He was a professor who didn't shave properly and was always asleep with a book covering his face. or talking in a daze, but his skills were outstanding in their own way. Whoa, after using magic to extinguish the candle, I looked up at the sky for a moment. The sunlight that gently seeps through the leaves occasionally stings my eyes. Still, the cool breeze felt good, and I felt like it was refreshing my head. In front of a private laboratory at the edge of the northern forest. After returning to Aiken Island for the first time in a while, the first thing I did was check out the facilities I had set up in the northern forest. The campfire in the center, with its flames fluttering, had grown considerably in size and had become a huge blaze. Yenika's cabin was converted into a warehouse, and my cabin was converted into a large building and became a personal laboratory. It's not often that a private laboratory like this is provided at the undergraduate level, but when I said I liked this place, they provided neat facilities. I felt very cared for in one way or another. When I come to the northern forest and sit quietly looking at the camp like this, I feel overwhelmed. Close your eyes gently, and when I quietly close my eyes and slowly open them, what I see is the penniless, ruined nobleman who was kicked out of Arfle's hall, sitting quietly on a bench. The boy was kicked out and ended up on the street with nothing, but that didn't stop him from living somehow. When I came to the northern forest, I put down my wooden bag and sat for a while. Eventually, I felt like I had to do something, so I gathered large leaves and stems to make a small wooden shelter. The story begins in that small, shabby wooden shelter. A small campfire is set up in front of it. The boy approaches and sits down on the tree stump in front of him. Make a workbench, drying rack, fishing rod, wooden spear, etc., and arrange them next to it. The appearance of the wooden shelter, which is a temporary shelter, gradually becomes more realistic. Occasionally, a girl would bring something to eat and chat. Away, a girl would take a nap in the wooden shelter. And then Lever Jr. would pass by while exercising, or a merchant would come and make an interesting suggestion. Before you know it, a small wooden warehouse is built and a nice cabin goes up. The tools that the boy was making while sitting on the tree stump got better in appearance as time went by. The size of the campfire has grown and is now large enough for 15 people to sit comfortably around it. The sun rises and sets. It rains and snows. As the years change, the cabin camp grows. When you open your eyes, you are now sitting between buildings that are now incomparably clean. I quietly watched the firewood burning, and then I picked up the butt and threw it in. I survived. There are questions that inevitably follow those who survive. It is a question about how to live. The past continued to become the present, and soon it will become the future. Now there is nothing left that I know about Sylvania's failed sword saint, because after running and running, I arrived at the end of the story. However, there is no ending to the story of the world. It is a story that will ultimately end in death, but it must continue as long as one does not die. To tell you the conclusion, the cliff point, the future, where everything Sylvania had observed would end, did not come. 2 years have passed since Bellbroke's death, and although the game scenario has been completely completed, the world still moves on. Every scenario has an end. The cliff point, she observed, is when all scenarios are completed, and the world closes. Was it such endless darkness? So as long as I come to this world like this, and exist as a variable, and look ahead, will such a dark future never come? Is the world moving towards a new trend because of my existence? Or is the apocalypse actually just postponed and the world is still moving toward eternal darkness? There is no way to check that. The reason is simple, because the future is unknown. Until now, we have taken the facts of the future for granted and responded to crises based on that information that was truly unusual. The future is inherently mysterious, so we live. Because we can never know what the future is, we try to live as people first. You are here. At that time, I heard someone calling me from behind. I quickly turned my head and saw a familiar face, Taylor McLaura. I was rather confused as to why this boy had come all the way here to visit me. This is because a lot has happened, but we have not yet achieved anything like reconciliation. Taylor came and sat down on the other side of the fire. Then she put down the sheath she was holding and quietly lowered her head. Thank you so much. It was an unexpected greeting. Even when I graduated, I didn't greet anyone in this manner. If you think about it, Ya'll be graduating soon too. Yes. Senior Ed took up a professorship as soon as he graduated, so we've been seeing her all the time, but I don't think we'll ever see each other anymore after we graduate. Even as Taylor said that she did not raise her lowered head. Why are you greeting me so suddenly? All business has already been completed. Yes, but when I look back on my undergraduate career, it was always Ed who contributed at important points. I didn't necessarily want to make him realize that fact. This is because I wanted Taylor McLaura to walk down the path of a hero. From the beginning, Taylor had no choice but to misunderstand. Thanks to this, Taylor was able to gradually become stronger and cut down Bellbroke as the main character of the stage, just as I wanted. Honestly, from my perspective, that was enough. Now that I've done everything that needs to be done, I have no more feelings left for Taylor. I'm sorry for not being able to say thank you in time. There were many misunderstandings, and there were many days when bad feelings accumulated. In the end, Senior Ed, no, Professor Ed was right. There is no need to package it too much. In fact, you must have suffered a lot from your perspective. I didn't really have the heart to blame Taylor, because sometimes I was the one who made things more difficult for Taylor. You did a good job and stayed until the end of the stage to do what you had to do. There's nothing else to say other than that. I just wanted to say hello to you like that, before I graduate. I looked at Taylor as she spoke, and then nodded without saying anything. Okay, because there was nothing more to say than that. Taylor picks up the sword again. He has now become a swordsman who will leave his mark in history. He will graduate from Sylvania Academy and live a life of adventure and travel of his own with Isla. I will become a hero who leaves behind many achievements and lives a brilliant life. Taylor passes by me to walk out onto the path beyond the long stretch of forest again. What suddenly came to mind was when I was sitting in my room taking care of my injured body and staring blankly at the computer screen. Even in the adventures and travels that unfolded on screen, Taylor never gave in to trials. He lived a life as a hero, receiving all the spotlight on stage. Even though it was a story beyond the screen for me at the time when I was frustrated with life and stuck in my room unable to adjust to peace, it could also be said that it was salvation in its own way, even if it is a made-up story. And even if it is a story that does not apply to the extras off stage, there are times when I feel like I am being saved if I just stare blankly. Stories of people who have overcome ordeals have the power to save someone. Hey, Taylor. When I called out Taylor, who was about to leave, he turned to me again with a puzzled look on his face. While contemplating what to say, I roughly threw the poker I had been burning into the fire and just threw it away. Have a hard time. That's the only story. Taylor quietly looks at my back, then says thank you and leaves. The road diverges and merges, but continues along. It continues as long as life allows. The number of people wanting to become new students at Sylvania Academy has not decreased. Although there was a disaster that left great pain, the Academy still produced many heroes, and its reputation grew day by day. Taylor McLaw, the sword saint who slayed the dragon. Isla Triss, who inherited the name of the great sage. Ziggs Eifelstein, the great hero of the northern steppes. Clevius Nortondale, a swordsman who mastered the art of blood swordsmanship. Elvira Aniston, alchemist of innovation. Phenia Elias Clole, the next emperor of the Clole Empire. Even Lortel Ketchelm, the next CEO of Elt Trading Company. The main character generation graduates under a shining light. He receives praise at the graduation ceremony and continues his life as a hero who will leave his mark in the history of the Empire. Sylvania Academy, which was their cradle, still stands tall on Aiken Island to produce new heroes and nurture talented people who will create the next era. And many new students flock to the academy to become a part of it. Wow, wow, a boy holding a magic wand tightly looked at the new student candidates gathered at the entrance to the northern forest of Aiken Island. They are all descendants of prestigious families. It is full of all kinds of noblemen and celebrities that even a boy from a country background would recognize at a glance. Among the crowd gathered with only the desire to become a new student at Sylvania Academy, the boy's childhood friend patted him on the back. Don't be discouraged, Felim. Hey, Elia, someone is freaking out. Just looking at you, you're shaking from despair. In a place like this, you have to be more confident. Ruler, don't show off as a country bumpkin. You can't lose to anyone with effort. The girl who gives courage to the trembling boy also came to enroll at Sylvania Academy. As I watched him confidently patting the boy's back while holding a large cane tightly, the boy soon came to his senses and gained courage. Yeah, I can't lose by working hard. As the boy was gathering his wits, a tall man came out through the crowd of students. It was full of murmurs. This is because all of the new student candidates gathered here knew the man's face. It's Ed Ross Taylor. It's real. Paper he came himself. SHH, I can hear you. Seeing a celebrity for the first time. That's because he's the professor in charge of selecting new students, so hell come in person. The age difference does not seem to be much, but just showing up wearing a cape and the title of professor gives the impression of being intimidating to those around you. Assistant Professor Traciana, who came in after him and was taking notes on everything, also felt like she was pressing down on the students around her with just her energy. Eventually, a man came out in front of the crowd. The assistant professor who followed him ordered silence, and soon the area became completely quiet. The man who glanced at everyone for a moment with his back to the interior of the North Forest spoke. It took a lot of hard work to come a long way. Everyone has their own circumstances and would like to enter Sylvania, but unfortunately only half of these students can enroll in Sylvania. Ed Rossdaler calmly spoke only the facts with an expressionless face. There was a strange sense of elation among the students when they actually heard the voice of Professor Ed Rossdaler, whom they had only heard about through rumors. They realized that they had really come to Sylvania Academy. When Ed Rossdaler looked at the assistant professor and gave instructions, Assistant Professor Tracy Anna raised her magic. Soon all the illusion discs installed in the northern forest activated scattering illusions in the form of various lower-level monsters and berserk lower-level spirits within the forest. The illusion itself will not cause physical damage, but if attacked you will suffer after effects that include mental pain. Inside, the forest monsters made strange noises and berserk spirits roared. The sound came through the trees and all the way to the entrance where everyone was gathered. The freshman candidates are beginners with brilliant backgrounds but no practical experience. They all swallowed their dry saliva and started to get nervous. You just have to cross the forest from here and reach the northern cliff area on the other side. The evaluation content itself is not that complicated. There is no need to choose between means and methods. Ed Rosteller spoke with his eyes tightly closed. Survive. That one concise and clear requirement was what Ed Rosteller asked of prospective students, because it was the most important thing. Survive at the Academy completed review. Hello, this is Corita. I remember posting my first serial in the winter of 2020 when it was so cold that I was shivering. When I came to my senses, it was 2 years later, the summer of 22. Time flies so fast. It seems like a lot has happened both personally and professionally during the 19 months that I have been serializing Surviving at the Academy Awards. Actually, this is my first time writing a novel this long. Each 250 episode has an average of 10,000 characters, so usually about 400 episodes were written. Now that I've finished the work, I have a lot of respect for established writers who have produced high-quality works. How much arduous work must the established writers have endured over and over again? As someone who finished a full-length novel for the first time, this is unimaginable. I've often imagined that I would finish a piece of work completely and write a review of it. Now that it's become a reality and I am writing a review, I am actually not sure what to write. Let's express our gratitude to our readers. The reason I can keep writing like this is because there are people who read. I try to imagine such a stereotypical thank you message with all kinds of rhetoric, but in fact, the more obvious facts are said, the less sincere it feels. So I won't go into detail. However, it is a fact as obvious as it is obvious. There's just no need to talk about it at length. Thank you so much to everyone who read this novel. I've never forgotten that the reason I can write anything is because there are people who read it. If you have read the story of Surviving at the Academy, you will know that there is still a little bit left. The story of Pulin's highest-ranking wind, Spirit, the story of Oldek's Old Fox Slog, and the story of Zelan and Glock's secret remain unresolved. And although the main character, Ed Rothtaler, has successfully confirmed the ending of the story, he still lives as an outsider in the world. I think we'll be able to tell a little more about Ed Rothtaler's story of how he meets a new friend and settles down in the world. The side story is probably, I think I will write it in a free serial style, like the days of free serials. In fact, I think that was the time when I was able to focus most fully on writing. I have many memories of hitting myself on the forehead because I was pressed for time and ended up regretting some things and not realizing them until later. Still, I think I will write with the mindset of posting at least one episode every 3 days, just like it was back then. However, rather than confirming it as a promise to readers, I think I'll leave it as a promise to myself for now. I will take a break for about a week and then come back with Yenica Palova side story, Wind Flower, on Monday, June 13th. There was a lot of talk and a lot of trouble, but thank you for staying with me until the end of the story. I love you, 2022. 6-4, posted by Corrida.